when webcomic artist Darcy Wheeler arrives at Pine Lake Lodge's winter artist retreat. She's desperate for inspiration to end her popular series Dating Disasters on a high note. Her publisher wants a fairy tale ending, but after years of turning her failed relationships into comic fodder, Darcy doesn't believe in happily ever afters anymore. Her cynicism only deepens when her agent springs a surprise publicity stunt, fake dating Callum Winters, the lodge's emotionally guarded owner, to generate buzz for her comic's finale. What starts with a chance encounter involving her cat, a moose, and a perfectly timed rescue quickly becomes more real than any panel she's ever drawn. But love isn't as simple as her comic strips would suggest. When Callum's ex-fiancée, Claire, arrives at the lodge, bringing with her the ghosts of shared trauma from their time as war photographers in Syria, Darcy must confront her own fears about turning real pain into content. As a Christmas Eve blizzard isolates the lodge, Darcy finds herself lost in more ways than one. With the help of her new friend Maya, a questionably sober pottery artist with a talent for uncomfortable truths, Darcy must decide if she's brave enough to stop drawing life and start living it, even if it means risking her heart on a happiness that can't be captured in panels and punchlines. Chapter 1. The Art of Pretending. The cursor blinked mockingly on Darcy's tablet screen, her stylus hovering over the final panel of this week's Dating Disasters. In the drawing, her cartoon alter ego stood frozen mid-laugh at a cafe table, while her latest failed suitor, thinly disguised with blue hair instead of brown, mansplained the intricacies of panel composition. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed for the third time that hour. Another message from her publisher.
Readers are dying to know how it ends. Give them the fairy tale they deserve.
Darcy set her stylus down and stretched, her joints protesting after hours hunched over her drafting desk. Outside her Toronto apartment window, holiday lights twinkled through the December drizzle, transforming the gray evening into something almost magical. Almost. She flicked back through her comics archive, thousands of panels documenting 5 years of her love life, or lack thereof. Each disastrous date, awkward encounter, and painful breakup transformed into pastel-colored comedy for her millions of followers. Her cartoon self smiled perpetually through it all, turning heartbreak into punchlines with an optimism Darcy hadn't felt in, she couldn't remember how long. The latest comment notification popped up.
OMG, can't wait for Dating Disaster Girl to finally find her happily ever after. She deserves it after everything.
If only they knew,
Darcy muttered, closing the browser. Her gaze landed on the stack of unopened Christmas cards from her married college friends, each envelope likely containing another wedding photo or baby announcement. She'd stopped opening them months ago. Her cat, Pablo, had butted her hand, demanding dinner with his usual impeccable timing. As she scooped organic kibble into his crystal bowl, his tastes as expensive as her own, her phone lit up again. This time, it was her agent.
Lindsay, please tell me you've figured out how to get me out of this ending. Better.
Lindsay's voice crackled with the particular enthusiasm that always preceded her worst ideas.
I figured out how to get you into it. Pack your snow boots, darling. You're going to fall in love in the Canadian Rockies.
Darcy's stomach dropped.
I'm what?
The Pine Lake Lodge Artist Retreat. I pulled some strings, got you in last minute. It's perfect, isolated location, creative atmosphere, and get this. The new owner is exactly your type. Tall, brooding, tragic backstory.
I don't have a type.
Darcy protested, even as her traitor hand reached for her sketchbook, already itching to capture the image Lindsay was painting.
Sweetie, you've drawn your type into every panel for 5 years. Trust me on this.
Lindsay paused for dramatic effect.
And trust me when I say this publicity stunt will give your readers exactly what they want.
Darcy looked at her tablet, where her cartoon self still waited for an ending. She thought of all the real endings she'd turned into content, each failed relationship becoming another story arc. Maybe it was time to write a different kind of ending, even if she had to fake it.
When do I leave?
Pablo meowed judgmentally from his crystal feeding station, apparently unimpressed with her life choices. That made 2 of them. 3 hours later, her suitcase lay open on her bed, half-packed and forgotten as she scrolled through old comic episodes on her tablet. Each story arc was a beautifully illustrated wound, wrapped in clever dialogue and bright colors. Issue #127, The Musician. Her cartoon self swooned over acoustic guitar serenades, while the real Chris had used her apartment as a free crash pad between gigs. Issue hashtag 156, The Professor. Readers had laughed at her character's wide-eyed fascination with Marcus's lectures on contemporary literature. They hadn't seen her delete herself from his syllabus's acknowledgments after finding the other student in his office after hours. Issue hashtag 203, The Startup Guy. That arc had gotten her the most engagement. Her followers loved watching her character navigate the tech bros and venture capitalists of Jake's world. They cheered when cartoon Darcy stood up to the toxic culture. They hadn't known about the real tears shed over real screenshots of real messages between Jake and his work wife. Pablo jumped onto her tablet, obscuring the panels with his fluffy presence. She scratched behind his ears, earning a purr.
At least you're consistent, aren't you? Food and attention, that's all you need.
Her gaze drifted to her most recent sketch, the final panel that would end it all. Her cartoon self stood alone, surrounded by thought bubbles of possible happy endings. She picked up her pencil and started erasing them, one by one. Her phone chimed with a weather alert for the Rockies. Heavy snow expected. Perfect conditions for an artificial romance in an artificial winter wonderland. She was good at artificial, wasn't she? She'd made a career of it, transforming real pain into palatable entertainment.
What do you think, Pablo? Should we give them the fairy tale ending they want?
She glanced at the latest fan comments.
Please let her find true love. She's been through so much.
Darcy closed the browser and zipped her suitcase with more force than necessary.
Sorry to disappoint. But true love is just another story we tell ourselves to sell more comics.
The princess never really tamed the beast. She just learned to draw him with softer edges. Chapter 2. The Long Road North. Pablo voiced his displeasure at the cat carrier with a sound somewhere between a growl and a sob.
I know.
Darcy muttered, wrestling him inside while trying to avoid his betrayed gaze.
But Mrs. Chen can't take care of you this time.
The elderly neighbor had picked today of all days to visit her grandchildren. Dawn hadn't quite broken over Toronto as Darcy loaded her last bag into her Subaru. The trunk was a Tetris game of art supplies, winter gear, and far too many sweaters, most still with their tags on, panic purchased from the clearance rack yesterday. Pablo's carrier occupied the passenger seat like a judgmental companion, his golden eyes tracking her every move as she settled behind the wheel. Her tablet sat in the center console, the final unfinished panel haunting her peripheral vision. She'd have to work on it during rest stops. Her followers were already speculating about the delay in her usual posting schedule. The city melted away in her rearview mirror, gray buildings giving way to gray highway giving way to gray sky. Pablo dozed off somewhere past Hamilton, his soft snores a counterpoint to the indie rock playlist she'd labeled Main Character Energy, in a moment of self-aware irony.
You know what's funny?
She asked her sleeping cat, as suburban sprawl transformed into winter bare farmland.
5 years of drawing myself finding love, and I still don't know what it's supposed to look like.
She glanced at her tablet.
But hey, at least I know what sells.
Hours ticked by. She stopped at a Tim Hortons, ordering coffee strong enough to pass for motor oil. While Pablo stretched his legs in the back seat, refusing to return to his carrier with aristocratic disdain, she scrolled through her comics comments.
I bet she ends up with the coffee shop owner from issue hashtag 189.
No way. She needs someone completely new, a fresh start.
As long as she gets her happy ending.
Darcy's coffee turned bitter on her tongue. If they wanted happy endings, they should read fairy tales, not semi-autobiographical webcomics about real people with real scars. The highway narrowed as it climbed into the Rockies, trees pressing closer, peaks looming larger. Snow started falling somewhere past Banff. Fat, lazy flakes that melted on her windshield. Her GPS cheerfully announced she was 30 minutes from Pine Lake Lodge, but the growing darkness suggested winter storm odds were better than happy ending odds. She rounded a bend and caught her first glimpse of the lodge through the trees, warm lights glowing in defiance of the gathering gloom, smoke curling from multiple chimneys like something from a Christmas card. Her cartoon self would have sighed dreamily at the sight. The real Darcy white-knuckled the steering wheel and muttered,
Well, that's aggressively picturesque.
Pablo meowed in agreement, or perhaps in concern at her tone. The final stretch of road wound through pristine forest. No streetlights, no buildings. Nothing but snow-laden pines and deepening shadows. Her headlights caught occasional glimpses of wildlife, a fox's retreating tail, a deer's startled pose. Perfect reference material for her comic's big finale, assuming she survived what was starting to feel like the opening scene of a horror movie. The lodge's driveway emerged from the darkness like an invitation, or a dare. Darcy pulled into a spot facing the main entrance, where golden light spilled from floor-to-ceiling windows onto fresh snow. Through the glass, she could see figures moving around a massive stone fireplace, their shadows dancing like characters waiting for their cues. She sat there for a long moment, engine idling, heat fogging her windows. Pablo stretched and put his paw on her arm, either in comfort or impatience.
Right.
She said, pulling out her tablet and opening a new sketch layer.
Time to start pretending.
Her stylus moved in practiced strokes, blocking out the basic shapes first. The steep pitch of the roof, the commanding presence of the stone walls. Usually, this was where she'd start adding her signature touches. Softening the angles, warming the shadows, creating the kind of place her readers would dream about visiting. But something stopped her. The lodge demanded honesty from her hands, each line coming out sharp and true. The shadows beneath the eaves grew deeper, not lighter. The window's warm glow seemed to emphasize the darkness surrounding them, rather than chase it away. Even the snow looked less like cartoon sparkles and more like a blank canvas waiting to be marked. She stared at the stark beauty she'd captured, so different from her usual style. There was something almost threatening in its reality, its refusal to be transformed into comic book whimsy. She closed the tablet without saving. Some things were better left undrawn. Chapter 3. First Impressions. Darcy's boots crunched through fresh snow as she lugged Pablo's carrier toward the lodge entrance. Before she could reach for the handle, a petite woman with silver-streaked curls burst through the door, radiating the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for long-lost relatives.
You must be Darcy. I'm Rose Chen, the retreat coordinator.
She glanced at Pablo's carrier with a knowing smile.
And this must be the famous Pablo from your comics. Don't worry, we're very pet-friendly here.
A crash from inside the lodge drew Rose's attention. Through the windows, Darcy caught sight of a tall figure wrestling with what appeared to be a massive pine branch, trailing Christmas lights in its wake. The man's flannel shirt stretched across broad shoulders as he maneuvered the branch through the great room, barely avoiding a cluster of easels.
Oh dear.
Rose sighed, though her expression held more fondness than concern.
Callum's redecorating again. Third time this week.
Callum?
Darcy asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew.
The owner, he's
Rose paused, choosing her words carefully.
particular about things, especially since the renovation.
Inside, Callum had managed to prop the branch against a wall. He stood back, studying it with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something far beyond mere Christmas decorations. A camera hung unused at his side. An expensive one, Darcy noted, the kind serious photographers favored. His features were hard to make out in the firelight, but something in his stance spoke of carefully contained energy, like a storm deciding whether to break.
Did he really inherit this place?
The question slipped out before Darcy could stop it.
He looks more like someone who should be scaling mountains than managing guest lists.
6 months ago,
Rose nodded, ushering Darcy inside.
after Richard, the previous owner, passed away. Those two were thick as thieves for years. Richard was teaching Callum the business, though I don't think either of them expected the handover to come so soon.
She lowered her voice.
He's been trying to fill some very big shoes. Between you and me, I think he forgets to sleep most nights.
As if on cue, Callum ran a hand through already disheveled dark hair, leaving a smudge of sap near his temple. He pulled out his phone, frowning at whatever he saw there.
The great room's not usually quite so.
Rose gestured at the scattered art supplies and half-decorated space.
We're preparing for the Christmas showcase. Usually Richard handled all this, but...
She stopped as another woman approached, carrying an armful of garland.
Oh, Darcy, this is Maya Singh, our resident painter. She's been coming to these retreats for years.
And still can't figure out why Captain Brooding over there won't let us help with the decorations.
Maya stage whispered, dark eyes dancing with amusement.
I keep telling him artists are generally good with composition, but...
She shrugged, nearly dislodging the garland. Callum chose that moment to step back, directly into an easel. He caught it before it could fall, his movement surprisingly graceful for someone so tall, but Darcy saw him wince at the near miss. His hand went to the camera again, an unconscious gesture that ended halfway.
He used to be a photographer, right?
Darcy found herself reaching for her own tablet, fingers itching to capture that aborted movement.
Used to be?
Maya raised an eyebrow.
Honey, nobody that good just stops. Though these days he only takes pictures of the guests when he thinks no one's looking. Like he's building some kind of secret documentary about joy.
She nodded toward the wall behind the check-in desk, where Darcy noticed a series of black and white photos. Artists lost in their work, hands stained with paint or clay, faces transformed by the act of creation.
They're beautiful.
Darcy murmured, studying one of an elderly man teaching a child to throw pottery, their shared delight evident even in monochrome.
They are,
Rose agreed softly.
but he won't put up any of his old work, the ones from before.
She trailed off as Callum approached the desk, though he seemed absorbed in whatever was on his phone.
Come on, I'll show you to your cabin. Rose got you the one with the best view. Perfect for an artist. And you can tell me all about this webcomic of yours. I have opinions about that coffee shop owner from issue 189.
As they headed for the door, Darcy glanced back. Callum had finally looked up from his phone, his gaze catching on one of his photographs. Something shifted in his expression. A softening around the eyes, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Then he was turning away, back to the pine branch and its tangled lights, shoulders set against whatever weight he carried. Pablo meowed impatiently in his carrier, reminding Darcy she had her own baggage to deal with.
So,
Maya said as they stepped into the snow.
how do you feel about hot chocolate and gossip? I make a mean peppermint mocha, and I want to hear what really happened with Professor Literature from issue 156.
For the first time since arriving, Darcy felt herself smile. Maybe she needed a friend more than a fake relationship, though judging by the knowing look in Maya's eyes, she might end up with both. Chapter 4. Unpacking.
Welcome to Cedar Cabin.
Maya announced, fumbling with the old brass key.
The lock sticks sometimes. You have to sweet-talk it.
She demonstrated with a combination of jiggling and muttered endearments until the door swung open with a dramatic creak. Warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Darcy's boots clicked against hardwood floors as she followed Maya inside, taking in the cozy space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already lit and crackling. Through the windows, snow-laden branches framed a view of the frozen lake below. Pablo voiced his approval by immediately squirming free of his carrier and claiming the window seat as his new throne.
Traitor.
Darcy muttered.
10 hours in the car and now you're acting like you own the place?
Cats,
Maya laughed, helping Darcy haul in her bags.
they're all secret real estate moguls. Now let's get you unpacked before dinner. The dining room serves at 7, and Chef Marcus takes punctuality very seriously.
They fell into an easy rhythm, Maya hanging clothes while Darcy arranged her art supplies on the desk beside the window. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by the sound of Pablo investigating every corner of his new domain.
So,
Maya said, reaching into another bag.
tell me about,
She pulled out something that definitely wasn't art supplies, her eyes widening with delight.
well, hello there.
Darcy spun around, horror dawning as she recognized the discreet black case in Maya's hands.
That's,
Your battery-operated boyfriend?
Maya grinned, setting it aside with casual grace.
Don't worry, honey, mine's bigger and louder. The walls here are pretty thick, thank God.
A startled laugh escaped Darcy's throat.
I can't believe I just met you and we're already comparing equipment.
Please, I've read your comics. That scene where dating disaster girl accidentally shows her toy collection during a video call with her mother? Iconic.
Maya continued unpacking as if they were discussing the weather.
Speaking of disasters, did you see our brooding host's biceps when he was wrestling that Christmas tree branch? I think even the straight guys were swooning.
I thought you said he was... What was it? Captain Brooding?
Oh, he absolutely is. But have you seen him in that flannel? A girl can appreciate the view while questioning his emotional availability.
Maya wiggled her eyebrows.
Though I noticed you noticing more than his biceps. Your artist's eye was definitely studying his composition.
Professional interest.
Darcy protested, busying herself with arranging pens.
He'd make an interesting character study.
Mm-hmm. And those soulful eyes and that jaw that could cut glass are just bonus research materials?
By the time they'd finished unpacking, The sun had dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow. Maya linked her arm through Darcy's as they crunched their way back to the main lodge, trading stories about their worst dates. The dining room buzzed with conversation, other artists gathering around heavy wooden tables. Maya steered them toward a corner spot with a good view of the room.
Best seat for people watching,
She explained with a wink. Over plates of surprisingly sophisticated comfort food, Maya filled Darcy in on the lodge's regulars.
That's Edward by the fireplace. He does these incredible metal sculptures. And Sarah near the window? Her pottery's been featured in galleries across Canada. We're like a little family, really. A weird, artistically dysfunctional family.
And Callum?
Takes care of everyone but himself.
Maya twirled pasta thoughtfully.
You know that photo wall by reception? He only puts up pictures of other people's happiness, never his own. Though God knows Rose tries to make him participate in things. She's basically adopted him at this point.
Darcy found her gaze drawn to the empty table in the corner, a laptop and stack of papers its only occupants.
Does he ever eat with everyone else?
Usually grab something late, after everyone's gone. Like I said, brooding.
Maya's expression softened.
Though sometimes when he thinks no one's looking, you catch these moments where he... I don't know. Looks at all this like he can't quite believe it's his. Like he's afraid it might disappear if he blinks.
Maya glanced at Darcy's empty plate.
Want to grab dessert? Chef Marcus makes these chocolate lava cakes that'll make you forget all about dating disasters.
Rain check?
Darcy stifled a yawn.
10 hours of driving is catching up with me, and I should probably check on Pablo.
And work on your comic.
Maya's eyes twinkled.
Don't think I didn't notice you sneaking sketches during dinner.
Professional hazard. Everything's potential content.
But Darcy felt her cheeks warm, remembering the quick studies she'd done of hands wrapped around coffee mugs, of shadows cast by the dining room's antler chandeliers, of a certain flannel-clad figure glimpsed through the kitchen doorway. They gathered their dishes and Maya walked her to the dining room entrance.
Breakfast starts at 7. I'll save you a seat. And don't think you're getting out of telling me the real story behind Professor Literature.
The night air bit at Darcy's cheeks as she followed the path back to her cabin, her phone's flashlight catching sparkles in the fresh snow. The woods seemed closer in the darkness, branches creaking in the wind. But warm lights glowed in cabin windows around her, and somewhere an owl called softly, turning the winter night magical instead of menacing. Her key stuck in the lock, and she remembered Maya's advice about sweet talk.
Come on, darling.
She coaxed, feeling only slightly ridiculous.
It's freezing out here.
The door yielded with a satisfying click. Pablo greeted her with an imperious meow from his window seat throne, clearly expecting praise for guarding the cabin in her absence.
Yes, you're very impressive.
She told him, scratching under his chin. The fireplace had burned low, casting the cabin in gentle shadows. She added another log, watching the flames catch and grow. Her tablet sat on the desk where she'd left it, blank screen reflecting the firelight. She settled into the chair, Pablo immediately claiming her lap as his new favorite spot. Her stylus hovered over the screen as she opened a fresh canvas. She should work on her comic. Her publisher was expecting the next installment, and her readers were getting restless. But her hands had other ideas. The firelight had cast such interesting shadows in the dining room, highlighting faces and hands, telling stories in light and dark. Her stylus began to move, capturing the way the flames had painted portraits of the artists lost in conversation, the way they'd caught on camera straps and flannel shirts, the way they'd revealed brief, unguarded moments when someone thought no one was watching. Chapter 5. The Art of Falling.
This is character development.
Darcy informed Pablo as she struggled to clip the leash onto his designer harness.
We're both trying new things, expanding our horizons, embracing, ow.
She yanked her hand back as Pablo expressed his opinion of horizon expansion with his claws. Darcy cracked open her cabin door, and the pre-dawn chill sliced through her clearance rack ski jacket. The price tag had promised professional-grade winter wear, but the awkward fit made her look like a marshmallow that had lost a fight with a vacuum sealer. Her new boots, marked down 70% and one size too large, squeaked with every step. Pablo took one delicate paw step into the snow, recoiled as if personally betrayed, and launched himself up her legs like a furry missile. She staggered as he climbed her like a cat tree, using her not-quite-zip jacket as handholds until he could drape himself around her shoulders like the world's most judgmental scarf.
You know, real outdoor cats actually touch the ground, right?
The leash dangled uselessly against her side as she trudged through the snow. Pablo responded by kneading her shoulder, his claws finding every gap in the jacket's insufficient insulation. The lake stretched before them like polished obsidian in the gray light, surrounded by snow-dusted pines. It was the kind of view her readers would swoon over, pure romance novel backdrop. All it needed was a rugged mountain man to complete the scene. A fallen log swept clean of snow by the wind offered a temporary resting spot. Darcy brushed off a patch with her oversized glove and sank down, wincing as the cold immediately seeped through her jeans. Pablo readjusted his position on her shoulders, his warm weight the only thing keeping her from retreating to her cabin's fireplace. The silence out here was different from Toronto's version of quiet. No distant sirens, no humming streetlights, no early morning delivery trucks. Just the soft patter of snow falling from laden branches and the occasional creak of ice from the lake. Her breath fogged in the air, joining the mist rising from the water's surface.
This would make a great panel,
she murmured to Pablo, framing the scene with her fingers.
The lone heroine contemplating her life choices while slowly freezing her.
A violent shiver cut off her narration. Even Pablo's fur scarf impression couldn't combat the mounting chill.
Okay, enough communing with nature.
She pushed herself up, her two big boots squeaking in protest.
Time to head back before...
A flash of movement caught her eye. Near the lake's edge, a moose emerged from the trees, its breath clouding in the cold air. Darcy reached for her tablet, then remembered she'd left it behind, afraid of dropping it in the snow.
Okay, Pablo,
she whispered, fishing her phone from her pocket.
Stay still. Mama needs reference photos for the comic's finale. Think how impressed the readers will be with authentic wildlife in the background of...
The angle wasn't quite right. The moose stood partially hidden behind a stand of birch trees, and the morning mist wasn't doing her any favors. A small snowbank to her right looked promising, just high enough to give her a clear shot over the trees.
Just a little higher,
she muttered, carefully picking her way up the packed snow. Her oversized clearance-rack boots, already a challenge on flat ground, slipped with each step. Pablo dug his claws deeper into her shoulders, apparently reconsidering his perch now that altitude was involved. She reached the top of the bank, triumphant. The view was perfect. The moose, the lake, the mountains beyond. A shot worthy of a professional photographer, if she did say so herself. The fact that the snowbank dropped off sharply on the other side didn't register as important until much later. That's when Pablo spotted the chickadee. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Pablo launched himself from her shoulders, apparently deciding that small birds were worth braving snow for after all. The leash, still attached to his harness, whipped around her legs like a bola. Her feet, already unsteady in the ill-fitting boots, tangled in the leash. The snow beneath her shifted treacherously. She windmilled her arms, phone flying in one direction, dignity in the other. And then, because the universe had a sense of humor, she heard the distinctive click of a camera shutter from the other side of the snowbank, followed by a startled, "Oh shit." She expected to hit snow. Instead, she slammed into something solid and warm that let out a very human oof. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and professional camera equipment. Before either could recover, Pablo darted between them, wrapping the leash around them like a demented maypole dancer.
Pablo, no.
Darcy started, but it was too late. The cat made one final victory lap around their prone forms before the cheap plastic clasp gave up with a distinctive snap. Pablo pranced a few feet away, sat down in the snow, and began grooming himself with an air of profound disappointment in them both. Darcy found herself blinking up at a jawline that could indeed cut glass, currently dusted with 2-day stubble and a rapidly spreading blush. Callum stared back at her, his eyes a startling shade of green this close, his camera somehow still clutched protectively above the snow. The broken leash bound them together like the world's most awkward Christmas present. Her brain short-circuited.
Come here often?
His lips twitched.
Considering I own the place.
Right, of course, I knew that. I mean, obviously I knew that,
She became acutely aware that she was still sprawled across his chest, their legs hopelessly tangled in Pablo's broken leash.
I'm Darcy. Though you probably figured that out from the, graceful entrance.
Callum.
He said, and she felt the rumble of his voice through her clearance rack jacket.
I usually charge extra for the trust fall team building exercises.
A laugh bubbled up in her chest, unexpected and genuine.
Is this what they mean by falling into the right opportunity?
His eyes crinkled at the corners, and oh, that was dangerous.
If this is your idea of networking, I have concerns about your LinkedIn profile.
A delicate cough interrupted whatever thoroughly inadvisable thing she was about to say next. They looked up, well, sideways, to find Rose beaming down at them, her phone held at the perfect angle to capture their compromising position.
Don't mind me.
Rose said cheerfully.
Just getting some content for the lodge's Instagram. You two look so natural together.
Natural?
Darcy squeaked.
Absolutely, though you might want to retrieve your cat before he terrorizes that poor moose.
Darcy's head whipped around, then immediately whipped back as she realized she'd just headbutted Callum's chin.
Sorry, I just...
Here, let me.
Callum tried to sit up, which only managed to tighten the leash wrapped around them.
No, wait, if I just...
Darcy attempted to roll sideways, but her oversized boot caught in the strap.
Maybe if we...
Could you...
They managed to get even more tangled, if that was possible. Rose didn't even try to hide her gleeful documentation of their struggles.
The leash is caught on your...
That's not the leash, that's my jacket zipper.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Finally, the broken clasp gave one last, fateful snap, and they tumbled apart in opposite directions. Darcy looked up just in time to see Pablo, freed from his leash, stalking toward the moose with murderous intent, his tail puffed to 3 times its normal size. The moose, to its credit, looked more confused than concerned.
Pablo!
Darcy scrambled up, immediately missing Callum's warmth.
No, you are not starting an international incident with the local wildlife.
She lunged for her cat, who dodged with aristocratic disdain. What followed was a distinctly undignified chase around the lake's edge, Pablo prancing just out of reach, the moose watching their dance with what she swore was amusement. Finally, Pablo allowed himself to be scooped up, purring as if this had been his plan all along. Darcy turned back to find Callum on his feet, brushing snow from his flannel shirt. The camera hung forgotten at his side as he watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read.
So,
She said, trying to salvage some dignity while cradling an unrepentant cat.
Do you always rescue falling artists, or am I special?
You know,
He said, brushing snow from his flannel shirt with exaggerated thoughtfulness.
I've caught quite a few falling artists in my time, but you're the first to come with your own furry wingman.
Lucky me.
She meant it to sound ironic, but it came out embarrassingly sincere.
I should get these photos uploaded. They're absolutely perfect for the winter romance package we're promoting.
Darcy and Callum's heads snapped toward her in unison.
The
What?
But Rose was already hurrying back toward the lodge, her phone clutched like a prize. Through the trees, Darcy thought she heard her humming something that sounded suspiciously like wedding bells. Pablo chose that moment to start purring directly into Darcy's ear, as if to say, "You're welcome."
I should.
Callum gestured vaguely with his camera.
Yeah, me too.
Darcy hitched Pablo higher in her arms. They stood there for a moment longer, snow falling softly around them, the moose long gone, the dawn painting everything in shades of possibility. Then Pablo sneezed directly in Darcy's face because apparently the universe believed in comic timing.
Right.
She backed away, nearly tripping again.
Thanks for the... breaking my fall. I mean, letting me break your fall.
Anytime.
Callum said softly, and she could have sworn his lips twitched again. She fled back to her cabin with as much grace as she could muster, which wasn't much considering she was carrying a smug cat and trailing a useless leash. Behind her, she heard the quiet click of a camera shutter, capturing a moment she wasn't meant to see. Chapter 6. Picture Perfect. Darcy dumped a still smug Pablo onto her cabin's window seat.
I hope you're happy. My first real interaction with our host, and you turned it into a slapstick routine.
Pablo began meticulously cleaning his paw, pausing only to give her a look that clearly said, "You're welcome." The dining room buzzed with morning activity when Darcy arrived, her hair still damp from a hasty shower. Maya waved frantically from their corner table, practically vibrating with barely contained glee.
Don't you dare!
Darcy warned, sliding into her seat.
I haven't said a word.
Your face is saying plenty.
Oh, honey, you have no idea what my face is saying compared to those photos Rose just showed me.
Maya stirred her coffee with deliberate slowness.
I particularly enjoyed the sequence where you and our ruggedly handsome host were getting better acquainted with gravity. And each other.
We fell, that's all.
Darcy buried her face in the coffee Maya had already ordered for her.
In the snow, with my cat.
Mm-hmm. And did his eyes really crinkle at the corners when he smiled? Because in the photos...
Look who's talking about getting better acquainted.
Darcy interrupted.
What happened to your battery-operated boyfriend being all you needed?
Bob and I have a beautiful relationship.
Maya sighed dramatically.
But sometimes when I see forearms like that wielding a camera...
She fanned herself with a napkin.
Let's just say Bob's batteries might be getting a break if I had those biceps too.
Good morning, ladies.
Rose materialized beside their table with impeccable timing. She held up her phone triumphantly.
The Lodge's Instagram has never seen this much activity. Look at these engagement numbers.
Darcy choked on her coffee. There on the screen was a perfect sequence of her and Callum's snowbank disaster, professionally framed and filtered. Her clearance rack jacket didn't look quite so ridiculous in the golden morning light, and the way Callum had instinctively cradled his camera above the snow while breaking her fall looked almost heroic.
Capture the magic of winter romance at Pine Lake Lodge, where unexpected moments become unforgettable memories.
Maya leaned over her shoulder.
Ooh, look at the comments.
Relationship goals. This is straight out of a Hallmark movie.
That chemistry, though.
It's not, we weren't.
Darcy's phone chose that moment to buzz.
From Lindsay, agent extraordinaire. Oh my God. Have you seen the Lodge's Insta? This is perfect. The publicity team is losing their minds. Your comics hashtag is already trending. Please tell me this gorgeous mountain man of yours is on board with the plan because this is marketing gold. Hashtag mountains, hashtag heart, hashtag camera.
Darcy looked up to find both Maya and Rose watching her with matching expressions of delight.
So?
Maya said, stirring her coffee with innocent enthusiasm.
Tell me more about these unexpected moments.
I hate all of you.
Darcy muttered, but she couldn't quite keep the smile from tugging at her lips as she remembered the way Callum's eyes had crinkled at the corners. Real. Not softened by her artist hand or filtered for social media. Her phone buzzed again.
This is exactly the ending your readers deserve. Keep it up. Maybe consider working a moose into the final panel, hashtag winky face.
Pablo, she decided, was definitely getting the fancy organic cat treats. His matchmaking skills were apparently better than his leash training. Chapter 7. Table for 3. A server appeared with plates piled high with what Maya dubbed Rocky Mountain Instagram bait. Thick-cut sourdough, French toast drowned in real maple syrup, eggs from the lodge's own chickens, and bacon that made Darcy seriously consider moving to the mountains permanently.
The chef stress bakes when he's nervous.
Maya explained around a mouthful of French toast.
Must be worried about the Christmas showcase. Last night it was cranberry scones at midnight. This morning?
She gestured at a basket of still warm cinnamon rolls.
Carb heaven.
At least someone's anxiety is delicious.
Darcy said, reaching for a roll.
Unlike my comics finale, which currently exists as exactly 0 panels and...
Mind if I join you?
Darcy's hand froze mid-reach. Callum stood beside their table, his own plate loaded with enough calories to fuel a small hiking expedition. His camera hung at his side like always, but something about his stance suggested he was ready to retreat at the first sign of rejection.
Of course.
Maya practically sang, shooting Darcy a look that promised merciless teasing later.
We were just discussing Darcy's artistic process.
Were we?
Darcy squeaked, then recovered.
I mean, yes. Very boring. You probably don't want to.
Actually,
he settled into the chair next to her, close enough that she caught a hint of pine and coffee.
I'd love to hear about it, especially after seeing your unique approach to reference photos this morning.
Oh, God.
Darcy dropped her head into her hands.
Can we pretend that never happened?
Absolutely not.
Maya declared.
Rose already has it scheduled for next year's brochure. Experience the wildlife up close and personal at Pine Lake Lodge.
Callum's laugh was unexpected, deep and genuine, with those dangerous eye crinkles making an appearance.
Better than last year's brochure. Richard had me pose with a stuffed moose.
No.
Darcy's head shot up.
Yes,
He pulled out his phone, scrolled briefly, then showed them a photo that had Darcy choking on her coffee and Maya actually snorting syrup.
You look so...
Darcy struggled for diplomacy.
Constipated?
He supplied.
Thank you. I tried to tell Richard the moose's antlers were anatomically incorrect, but...
Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of his mentor. There and gone before Darcy could capture it.
Speaking of anatomically incorrect,
Maya jumped in smoothly.
show him that panel from issue 142, Darcy. The one with the bear?
You read Darcy's comic?
Callum asked, turning those green eyes on Darcy with genuine interest.
Rose mentioned you were a webcomic artist, but I admit I'm not up on the latest... What did she call them? Digital graphic narratives?
Maya choked on her coffee.
Digital graphic? Oh, honey, no. This isn't some avant-garde art piece. This is pure, unfiltered.
Adventure!
Darcy cut in quickly.
It's about adventures and wildlife. Sometimes, like that bear Maya mentioned. Very educational.
Educational bears?
Absolutely.
Maya grinned wickedly.
Especially the one in the hot tub scene.
Which was completely metaphorical.
Darcy's voice hit a pitch she hadn't achieved since middle school choir.
It's more about life experiences, dating experiences, but not, real ones. Entirely fictional, completely made up. No actual people involved whatsoever.
Dating?
Something shifted in Callum's expression. Curiosity mixed with what might have been amusement.
Is that why Rose was so insistent about the Instagram photos this morning?
No. Maybe.
Darcy's mind raced. How exactly did you tell someone you just met that their inherited lodge's social media manager had accidentally kick-started your fake dating publicity stunt? Or that your agent was probably already drafting press releases? Or that your millions of readers might soon be analyzing his every move through the lens of a romantic subplot? Maya watched this internal crisis with the enthusiasm of someone at a tennis match.
It's complicated.
Darcy finished lamely.
Life usually is,
Callum said softly, and something in his tone made her look up. He was studying her with an intensity that belonged behind his camera lens, like she was a subject he couldn't quite figure out how to frame.
Maybe you could.
Mr. Winters, there's a situation with the hot water heater in cabin 4,
said an approaching server.
Again?
He sighed, already standing.
Sorry, I should...
No, of course.
Darcy said quickly.
Go be heroic. Save the hot water.
His lips twitched.
Somehow less dramatic than saving falling artists. But duty calls.
He hesitated, then added,
Maybe we could continue this conversation later. I'd love to hear more about your work.
Yes.
Maya answered for her.
She'd love that.
They watched him stride away, stopping to check on other guests as he went. Several of the artists sketched him not so subtly as he passed.
Girl?
Maya turned to Darcy with the intensity of a sugar-high matchmaker.
Did you see how he looked at you when you mentioned being heroic? Like he was remembering exactly how you felt in his arms this morning? And don't think I missed that little smile when you blushed. That man is...
unavailable.
Darcy cut in, but she couldn't stop her eyes from following him.
Did you see how he changed when he mentioned Richard? He's still grieving. Still trying to fill those shoes. The last thing he needs is to be dragged into my mess of a love life. Fake or otherwise.
Honey...
Maya's voice softened.
Maybe that's exactly what he needs. And maybe...
Don't.
Darcy stabbed her French toast with unnecessary force.
This is business, marketing, content for the comic. Nothing more.
Maya sat back, unconvinced.
Keep telling yourself that. Meanwhile, I'll just sit here appreciating how those jeans fit him when he bends to fix things. For artistic reference.
I hate you.
You love me. Now eat your Instagram bait before it gets cold. You'll need the energy for all the falling you'll be doing later.
That was one time.
The day is young.
Maya said sagely, reaching for another cinnamon roll.
And there are so many more snowbanks to explore.
Chapter 8. Pine Fresh.
I'm just saying.
Maya mused, watching Darcy push the last bite of French toast around her plate.
There are worse things than having a rugged mountain man star in your grand finale.
He's not starring in anything.
Darcy protested.
He's just background scenery.
Very muscular scenery.
Before Darcy could defend herself, Rose's voice rang through the dining room.
Everyone, Our annual Christmas tree expedition begins in 5 minutes. Remember, 1 tree per cabin, no taller than 6 feet, and please use the saws provided. We don't want a repeat of last year's chainsaw incident.
Several of the veteran artists winced. The tree lot sprawled across a gentle slope behind the lodge, neat rows of pines dusted with fresh snow. Darcy clutched her provided saw like it might bite her, while Maya practically skipped ahead, regaling her with tales of Christmas tree expeditions past.
And then Edward tried to drag a 12-footer back by himself, rolled straight down the hill, and...
Maya stopped mid-sentence, grabbing Darcy's arm.
Oh my God.
Darcy followed her gaze. Callum stood at the edge of the lot, demonstrating proper sawing technique to a group of attentive artists. He'd shed his flannel overshirt in the weak winter sun, leaving him in a thermal Henley that did nothing to hide the way his muscles moved as he worked.
That
Maya declared.
Should be illegal before noon.
Darcy meant to roll her eyes. She really did. But there was something compelling about the quiet confidence in his movements, the way his hands gripped the saw with familiar strength, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows. Her fingers itched for her tablet, not to soften his edges this time, but to capture them exactly as they were, sharp and real and unexpectedly beautiful.
Earth to Darcy.
Maya sang.
Your scenery is showing.
I'm not. He's not. I'm simply appreciating the technical aspects of...
Of what? His technique? Because I'm definitely appreciating his technique.
You're terrible.
You're blushing.
She was, and not just from the cold.
It's just research for the comic.
Sure it is.
Maya's grin turned wicked.
And I'm sure your readers would love a detailed study of those forearms. Very educational. Speaking of which...
Callum chose that moment to look up, catching Darcy's eye. A small smile tugged at his lips, and she suddenly remembered exactly how solid his chest had felt that morning when she'd fallen against him.
I need a tree.
She announced abruptly, turning down the nearest row of pines.
A small one, for Pablo to climb and knock over, repeatedly.
Running away won't help. His biceps can probably catch you.
I hate you.
You love me. And you're not denying the biceps thing.
Darcy ducked behind a particularly full pine, pressing her cold hands to her burning cheeks. This was ridiculous. She drew hot guys all the time, made careers out of turning real men into fictional love interests. This shouldn't be any different. She wandered deeper into the lot, half-heartedly examining trees while her mind wandered to far more dangerous territory. Like the way his sleeve had rolled up when he gripped the saw, or how the cold air had brought a flush to his cheeks that her finest digital brushes couldn't replicate.
Too tall.
She muttered to herself, passing a magnificent blue spruce.
Too wide.
To a perfectly round white pine.
Too tree-like.
To a completely innocent balsam fir that didn't deserve her distraction. She turned down another row, this one leading slightly downhill and around a bend. The lodge disappeared from view, leaving her alone with the pines and her thoroughly inappropriate thoughts about their owner.
You're being ridiculous.
She informed a small Fraser fir.
This is business, marketing, content. Nothing more than...
Found your tree yet?
His voice came from directly behind her, because the universe hated her. Darcy yelped, spinning around and nearly taking out a sapling with her saw.
Trees, yes.
Smooth, she thought. Very smooth. Absolutely the kind of wit your readers expect from dating disaster girl. But Callum just smiled. That small, real smile that made his eyes crinkle.
Need some help? I'm told I have good technique.
Maya's distinctive cackle echoed from somewhere in the tree lot. Oh, Darcy thought faintly, watching the winter sun play across his features. I am in so much trouble. Chapter 9. Oh, Christmas Tree.
Trees, yes.
Darcy clutched her saw like a shield.
Just looking for something small, apartment-sized. Pablo-proof, if such a thing exists.
Pablo-proof?
Callum's eyes crinkled.
After this morning's wildlife encounter, I'm not sure that exists in nature.
Fair point. Maybe I should just get him a cardboard box and call it festive.
Or...
Callum stepped past her, his arm brushing her jacket.
You could try this one.
He gestured to a perfectly shaped Fraser fir about 4 feet tall.
Small enough for your cabin, but sturdy enough to withstand feline judgment.
Darcy circled the tree critically.
I don't know. Pablo's judgment is Olympic level.
Tell you what,
He pulled his own saw from his belt loop.
if your cat knocks it over, I'll personally deliver a cardboard box replacement.
My hero.
She said dryly, but her stomach did a little flip when he grinned.
All right, Tree Whisperer. Show me how this is done without losing any fingers.
First,
He moved behind her, and suddenly she was very aware of how close he was.
you need to get the angle right.
His hands covered hers on the saw handle, adjusting her grip. She caught that scent again. Pine and coffee and something uniquely him.
Down low is better.
His voice rumbled near her ear as he guided her to kneel in the snow.
More stable.
That's what she said.
Darcy muttered before she could stop herself. His startled laugh warmed her neck.
Did you just...
Nope. Just focusing on proper tree felling technique. Very serious. Very professional.
Of course.
She could hear the smile in his voice.
Now smooth strokes. Let the saw do the work.
They fell into a rhythm, the saw's teeth biting into the trunk. Darcy tried to focus on the task and not on how solid his chest felt against her back, or how gracefully his hands moved, or click. They both looked up to find Rose aiming her phone at them, beaming.
Oh, don't mind me. This is perfect for our traditional mountain Christmas series. The lighting is just...
Rose.
Callum's voice held a warning note.
Right, sorry, pretend I'm not here.
She backed away, still snapping photos.
Just capturing the magic, the romance, the proper lumberjack techniques.
Darcy let her forehead thunk against the tree.
Does she always?
Constantly.
Callum sighed.
Richard used to say she was one photo essay away from making this place the Hallmark Channel's winter headquarters.
They finished cutting in companionable silence, both very aware of Rose circling like a particularly enthusiastic documentary filmmaker.
Timber.
Darcy whispered as the tree tilted. Callum caught it before it could hit the ground, making the motion look effortless.
Show off?
She accused.
Just practicing my heroic timing.
He winked. Actually winked. And Darcy's brain short-circuited.
Hey, lovebirds.
Maya's voice carried across the lot.
Some of us could use those muscles over here.
They turned to see Maya standing beside a tree that was definitely taller than the 6-foot limit, trying to look innocent.
Maya?
What? It's only like 6'1". Maybe 2. Definitely not 12 feet like Edward's attempt.
I don't know.
Darcy called back, grateful for the distraction from whatever her heart was doing.
Looks more like 6'7" to me.
Perfect.
Maya clapped.
That's Callum's height exactly, see? It's meant to be. Now come help us carry these back, Mountain Man. Some of us skipped arm day to work on our artistic vision.
Callum shook his head, but he was smiling.
All right, let's get you both sorted.
Before either woman could protest, he hoisted both trees, one over each shoulder, like he was carrying grocery bags instead of whole conifers.
Sweet baby Jesus.
Maya breathed.
I'm not swooning.
Darcy whispered.
Sure, honey, keep telling yourself that.
They followed him up the path, Maya recording the show for posterity on her phone while Darcy tried very hard not to stare at the way his Henley stretched across his shoulders. The trees seemed to frame him like nature's own Instagram filter.
And to think,
Maya sighed dreamily.
you were going to hire a delivery service.
I was being practical.
Practical is boring. Practical doesn't have biceps that could bench press Christmas.
Where do you want yours, Maya? Same spot as last year?
Callum asked, carefully setting Darcy's tree down on her cabin's porch.
You know me so well.
Maya grinned.
Right by the bay window where I can show off my superior decorating skills to all my neighbors.
She winked at Darcy.
All one of them now.
Inside Maya's cabin, Callum positioned the tree with practiced ease.
I still remember the great tinsel disaster of 2022 when you tried to put it next to the fireplace.
That was one time.
Maya protested.
And the smoke alarm only went off twice.
3 times.
He corrected, adjusting the trunk in its stand.
Richard had to rewrite the whole holiday safety protocol because of you.
Something soft crossed his face at the mention of his mentor, and Darcy found herself stepping closer, almost unconsciously. Maya caught the movement and smoothly changed subjects.
Speaking of disasters, want some hot chocolate? I've got those fancy marshmallows left over from last night's sugar binge.
I should probably.
Callum started.
Stay.
Maya insisted.
Considerate payment for your tree carrying services. Besides, Darcy hasn't heard about the time I tried to turn my Christmas tree into an art installation.
The fire marshal has.
Callum muttered, but he was smiling again as he settled onto Maya's couch. Click.
Rose!
All three exclaimed.
Sorry.
Came the unrepentant reply from the doorway.
But this is going to look amazing with the fairy light filter. So cozy, so festive, so...
Get in here and close the door.
Maya laughed.
You're letting the cold air in. And since you're here, you can help me find those marshmallows. I think they migrated behind my paint supplies.
Darcy sank into an armchair, watching Maya and Rose bicker playfully about proper marshmallow storage while Callum added his own dry commentary. The scene felt warm, lived in, like a favorite sweater or a well-loved comic panel. The kind of moment she usually had to soften with her stylist to make believable. But this time she realized she wouldn't have to change a thing. Chapter 10. Stories and Secrets. Darcy sank into the armchair, cradling her hot chocolate while Maya rummaged through her kitchen cabinets. Rose perched on the window seat, her ever-present phone temporarily forgotten as she watched Callum settle onto the couch.
So,
Maya called over her shoulder.
should we tell Darcy about the great metal sculpture incident?
Callum's eyes lit up in a way that made Darcy's stomach do a little flip.
You mean Edward's masterpiece of mayhem?
Oh God, yes!
Rose clapped her hands.
Darcy, you have to hear this. Callum tells it best.
I don't know.
He demurred, but his lips twitched.
It loses something without the visual of Richard's facial expressions.
Please?
The word slipped out before Darcy could stop it. When he looked at her, surprised, she added,
I mean, for research purposes. Artist retreats gone wrong could be great comic material.
Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Interest? As he leaned forward, elbows on his knees.
Well, if it's for research.
Maya distributed mugs of hot chocolate, each topped with an architecturally improbable tower of marshmallows, then curled up on the floor near the fireplace.
Set the scene, Mountain Man.
It was 2 winters ago.
Callum began, his voice dropping into a natural storyteller's rhythm. Darcy found herself studying the way the firelight played across his features, softening the usual guardedness she'd noticed earlier. His hands moved as he spoke, artist's hands, strong but graceful. She should be sketching this, she thought distantly, but for once she wanted to just watch.
Edward. You'll meet him later. He's the one who makes those massive metal sculptures in the workshop. Had this vision for a piece he called Winter's Heart.
Maya caught Darcy's eye, raising an eyebrow at her friend's obvious fascination. Darcy quickly looked away, but not before Maya's knowing smirk made her cheeks warm.
Pretentious already.
Maya stage whispered, though her attention remained more on Darcy's reaction than the story. Callum didn't seem to notice their silent exchange, too caught up in his tale. A lock of hair had fallen across his forehead, and Darcy's fingers itched with the urge to brush it back. For reference purposes, she told herself. Purely artistic observation.
He'd been working on it for weeks,
Callum continued. And God, his voice had this way of pulling you in, warm and rich like the hot chocolate in her hands.
All very secretive. Wouldn't let anyone in the workshop. Richard was getting nervous because, well, Edward's previous piece had been somewhat...
Maya cleared her throat pointedly, and Darcy realized she'd been staring at the way Callum's throat moved when he spoke. She took a hasty sip of her hot chocolate, nearly choking on a marshmallow. Maya's shoulders shook with silent laughter.
Explosive,
Rose suggested.
Experimental?
Callum corrected diplomatically.
But this one was different. Bigger. More ambitious. Edward said he'd figured out how to capture the exact moment ice crystallizes.
Oh no.
Darcy breathed, already seeing where this was going.
Oh yes.
Callum's eyes met hers, dancing with suppressed laughter.
Picture this. Christmas Eve. Everyone's gathered in the great room for the holiday showcase. Edward wheels in this massive structure, all twisted metal and delicate spires. Beautiful, really. Until...
Darcy found herself leaning forward.
Until he decided to demonstrate the crystallization process, which apparently involved some very questionable electrical components, and what he swore was just a touch of propane.
Maya was already giggling.
Tell her about Richard's boots.
I'm getting there. So the sculpture starts humming, which wasn't part of the plan, then sparking, which was definitely not part of the plan. Richard's reaching for the fire extinguisher when Edward yells, "The metal's supposed to do that," while Richard's trying to put out the fire with his designer snow boots.
Callum's voice shook with laughter.
Custom-made Italian leather, completely ruined. But he kept stamping away, yelling about insurance premiums while Edward's trying to explain the artistic significance of controlled combustion.
Darcy found herself laughing not just at the story, but at the way Callum told it. His hands painting pictures in the air, his voice shifting to capture each character perfectly, his whole face alive with the memory. This wasn't the brooding figure from the dining room or the careful professional from the tree lot. This was someone else entirely. Someone real.
To be fair,
Callum added from his spot on the couch.
the sculpture turned out amazing. Once we convinced the fire department it was performance art.
Rose snorted into her hot chocolate.
Performance art? I still have the incident report where Richard wrote, "Artistic vision exceeded safety protocols."
Darcy watched Callum's face soften at the memory, noticed how his fingers absently traced the strap of his camera.
He sounds wonderful,
She said quietly.
He was.
Callum's voice held warmth beneath the grief.
He had this way of seeing the potential in everything, everyone.
Speaking of potential,
Rose's eyes gleamed with familiar mischief.
those photos from this morning are getting quite the response. The one of you two by the lake? Pure magic. Almost like it was meant to be.
Rose.
Callum warned, but there was a flush creeping up his neck.
I'm just saying. Sometimes the best stories write themselves, or draw themselves in this case.
She winked at Darcy.
Your readers are going to love.
Who needs refills?
Maya jumped up.
Darcy, come help me with the snacks. And maybe find those chocolate-covered almonds I hijacked from the gift shop.
They're in your room.
Rose called after them.
Behind your art supplies.
Maya dragged Darcy down the hallway to her bedroom, closing the door with exaggerated stealth.
Okay, Spill. What's happening with you and Mountain Man out there?
Nothing's happening. It's just marketing. Like we discussed.
Honey, I've seen marketing. That thing with his hands on the saw handle? That was chemistry.
Maya flopped onto her bed.
Pure, uncut, Hallmark movie wishes it was this good chemistry.
Darcy sank down beside her, only to leap up with a yelp as something buzzed beneath the covers.
Oh, God.
Maya dove for the blankets, emerging with a device that was indeed significantly larger than Darcy's.
I told you Bob was bigger, though
She waggled her eyebrows.
maybe you won't need the comparison for much longer.
Maya.
What? I'm just saying the way he looks at you.
He looks at everyone like that, all intense and genuine and...
Actually,
Maya's voice softened.
he doesn't. I've known him since Richard hired him to photograph the retreat 5 years ago. He's always been kind, but distant. Especially since... But today, the way he laughs around you, that's new.
Darcy picked at a loose thread on Maya's quilt.
It doesn't matter. Once he finds out about the comic, about how I turn real people into content.
Or maybe he'll understand that you see the beauty in real moments. Just like he does with that camera.
That's different.
Is it?
Maya tucked Bob away in a drawer.
You both capture life as it happens. You just use different tools.
From the living room, they heard Callum's laugh, deep and genuine, at something Rose had said.
Just be careful with him.
Maya said quietly.
He's been through a lot. And if you break his heart, I'll have to kill you. Which would be tragic because I'm actually starting to like having you around. Plus, who else is going to appreciate my inappropriate commentary and dubious life choices?
Darcy threw a pillow at her.
You're terrible.
I'm delightful. Now come on, let's get back out there before Rose convinces him to pose for more promotional shots. Though,
She grinned wickedly.
maybe we should let her. For artistic reference.
I hate you.
You love me. Almost as much as you're starting to love those biceps.
I will smother you with your own Christmas tree.
Worth it.
They grabbed the almonds and headed back to the living room, where Rose was showing Callum something on her phone that had him looking both embarrassed and pleased.
Everything okay in there?
He asked, those green eyes finding Darcy's.
Perfect.
Maya answered before Darcy could.
Just girl talk. You know, comparing artistic techniques.
Darcy choked on an almond. Some things, she decided, were better left undrawn. And unspoken. Definitely unspoken. Chapter 11. Drawing lines. Darcy coughed, Maya pounding helpfully on her back as she choked on the almond. When she could breathe again, she found Callum watching her with concern, those green eyes entirely too intense for her peace of mind.
I should probably get back.
She managed, setting down her mug.
Pablo will be plotting revenge for his outdoor adventure by now.
Let me help with your tree.
Callum said, already standing.
Wouldn't want you to undo all my heroic work from this morning.
Behind him, Maya caught Rose's eye and made a gesture that was definitely not appropriate for holiday cards. Rose stifled a giggle behind her phone. The walk to Darcy's cabin was short but charged with something that made the cold air feel electric. Pablo waited in the window, his golden eyes following their approach with regal interest.
Here should be good.
Darcy said as Callum positioned the tree near her fireplace.
Though knowing Pablo, it'll end up wherever he decides it belongs.
As if summoned, Pablo leapt down from his perch and wound between Callum's legs, purring loudly.
Traitor,
Darcy muttered.
I think he's just a good judge of character.
Callum smiled, crouching to scratch behind Pablo's ears. The cat melted into his touch, purring harder.
Now you're just showing off.
Maybe.
He looked up at her through that fallen lock of hair, and for a moment, the air between them felt thick with possibility. Then his gaze drifted past her to her desk, where her tablet displayed her latest comic draft.
Is that?
Darcy's stomach dropped. On the screen was a half-finished panel of her latest disaster date. A brooding photographer who kept his emotions locked behind a camera lens.
It's not. I mean, I was just...
She moved to close the tablet, but Callum was already looking through her previous panels with quiet interest.
These are about real people?
His voice was carefully neutral.
Your past relationships?
Some of them. Not all. I mean, I change things, make them fictional, but...
She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the crackling fire.
The core stories come from somewhere real.
He nodded slowly, still studying the panels. She waited for the accusation, the betrayal, the realization that she turned real pain into profitable entertainment.
You're very talented,
he said, still studying the panels.
The detail work is impressive.
Thank you.
Darcy's voice came out too bright, too brittle.
And thank you for today, for saving me. And the tree, and the stories. All of it. Really. It was...
She was backing toward the door, practically hurting him with her nervous energy.
It was great. Perfect. But I should really get to work. Deadlines, you know? Can't keep the readers waiting.
Callum looked up from the tablet, brow furrowed in confusion.
Are you...
Fine. Totally fine. Just busy. Very busy. Comic stuff. Artist stuff. You understand?
Pablo wound between them one last time, as if trying to anchor them in place. But Darcy was already opening the door, letting in a blast of cold air.
Darcy.
There was a question in the way he said her name, concern mixing with confusion in those green eyes.
Thanks again.
She was practically vibrating with panic now.
For everything, really. So much. Bye.
The door closed between them before he could respond. Through the window, she watched him stand there for a moment, snow gathering in his hair, expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked away. His shoulders relaxed, but his steps measured, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Pablo meowed accusingly from her feet.
I know.
Darcy sighed, sinking into her desk chair.
I messed up.
She looked at her tablet, at the unfinished panel of a man who kept the world at a safe distance. She thought she was drawing him. Turned out she'd been drawing herself all along. The irony would make a great comic panel, if only it didn't hurt so much. Chapter 12. Projections.
I ruined everything.
Darcy burst into Maya's cabin without knocking, tears already blurring her vision. Maya looked up from her half-decorated tree, taking in Darcy's state with practiced concern.
What happened? Did Pablo finally commit moose murder?
He saw my comics.
Darcy collapsed onto Maya's couch, face buried in a throw pillow.
The ones about him. Well, not about him exactly, but inspired by him. Which is basically the same thing. And now he probably thinks I'm some kind of emotional vampire who feeds on other people's pain for profit. And then I completely lost it, Maya. I thanked him. Like 1,000 times. For everything. The tree, the moose rescue, existing. I think I even thanked him for Pablo liking him, which is mortifying enough on its own. But then I just kept going. It was like my mouth was stuck on repeat and my brain was screaming abort mission, but couldn't find the off switch and...
She buried her face deeper into the pillow.
I practically pushed him out the door. He was trying to say something, probably trying to let me down gently, or tell me how inappropriate it was to use him as inspiration. But I just kept babbling, thank you and goodbye, like some kind of deranged greeting card come to life and...
Breathe.
Maya commanded, settling beside her.
What did he actually say?
What?
Callum. What were his exact words when he saw the comics?
He said.
Darcy frowned.
He said I was talented, that the detail work was impressive.
That monster.
Maya deadpanned.
But he was thinking...
Oh, so you're psychic now?
I didn't give him a chance to.
Darcy stopped, realization dawning.
To what? Express the horror you've already decided he felt? Share the judgment you've already convicted him of?
Maya's voice softened.
Honey, you didn't even let him finish a sentence before you panic-thanked him out the door.
I panic-thanked very thoroughly.
Darcy mumbled into the pillow.
I'm sure you did.
Maya patted her head.
But consider this. Maybe, just maybe, you're projecting your own fears onto someone who hasn't actually expressed any of them.
Darcy's phone chose that moment to buzz, multiple times.
From Lindsay. The engagement numbers are insane. Hashtag Pine Lake Love is trending. Keep this up and we'll have publishers fighting over the book deal.
From publisher, these photos are gold. The rugged artistic mountain man angle is perfect for your demographic. When can we expect the first panels?
From Lindsay. Is that his real jawline? Please tell me that's his real jawline.
Darcy groaned and shoved her phone under the pillow.
It doesn't even matter what he thought about the comics now. I acted like a complete lunatic and chased him away. Who thanks someone 7 different times while physically backing them toward a door? He probably thinks I'm unstable, or contagious, or both.
Maya sat back down, pulling Darcy into a side hug.
Look, best case scenario? He's confused but intrigued by the weird, talented artist who gets flustered around him. Worst case? He's just confused. But either way, you haven't ruined anything except maybe your dignity, which, let's be honest, took a hit the moment Pablo decided to fight a moose.
But...
No buts. You're catastrophizing, which means you need food. Low blood sugar makes everything seem worse.
Maya stood, tugging Darcy up with her.
Come on, you need lunch.
I need to hide in your cabin forever.
You need food. Real food, not just emotional support almonds. Besides...
Maya's eyes twinkled.
A little bird told me Callum usually has lunch in the main dining room around this time.
That's exactly why I can't.
That's exactly why you should. You can't avoid him forever. This place isn't that big.
Watch me try.
Darcy.
Maya's voice turned serious.
It's been what, 6 hours since you arrived? And in that time you've managed to tangle yourself up with a moose, a mountain man, and your own assumptions. At least give the man a chance to form his own opinion before you decide what it is.
When did you get so wise?
Please, I've been reading your comic for years. I know all about self-sabotaging relationships before they start.
Maya linked their arms.
Now come on. If nothing else, Chef Marcus is making his famous wild mushroom soup, and I promise to only make 3 bicep-related comments during the entire meal.
2.
Fine, 2, but they better be good ones.
Despite herself, Darcy felt a laugh bubble up.
I hate you.
You love me. Now let's go face your completely imaginary crisis with carbs and dignity.
Can we skip the dignity part?
Honey, you took your cat for a walk this morning. I think that ship has sailed.
Chapter 13. Missing Pieces. The walk to the lodge gave Darcy time to compose herself, though she kept obsessively smoothing her hair and checking her reflection in her phone to ensure her earlier crying wasn't obvious.
Stop that.
Maya swatted her hand down.
You look fine. Like a perfectly normal person who definitely didn't thank someone 7 times in 30 seconds.
I hate you.
You keep saying that, yet here we are.
The dining room buzzed with lunchtime activity. Artists gathered in small groups discussing their morning projects. Maya led them to their spot from breakfast, but Darcy couldn't help noticing the empty corner table where Callum's laptop usually sat.
He always has lunch here.
Maya murmured, following her gaze.
Even Richard couldn't break him of that habit.
Darcy's stomach twisted.
So he is avoiding me.
Or,
Maya said pointedly, pulling out Darcy's chair.
He's dealing with actual lodge business. You know his job? The thing he was doing before you decided he was judging your entire career based on 30 seconds of panic?
But...
Nope.
Maya pushed Darcy's tablet toward her.
Here's what you're going to do. You're going to draw, because that's how you process things. Draw the room, draw the people, draw whatever helps you get out of your head.
I don't think...
Exactly, you're thinking too much. Draw.
Darcy opened a new canvas, more to shut Maya up than anything else. But as her stylus moved across the screen, capturing the way light fell through the windows onto gathered artists, the knot in her chest began to loosen. She sketched quick studies. Edward gesturing animatedly about his latest project. Sarah shaping air with her potter's hands as she described a new glaze technique. Rose sneaking photos of everyone while pretending to check her phone. Maya sat quietly beside her, occasionally pushing food toward her until Darcy absently ate it. The soup was indeed amazing, though Darcy couldn't remember actually tasting most of it.
Better?
Maya asked as Darcy finally set down her stylus.
Yeah.
Darcy looked at her sketches. Loose, unfussy captures of real moments. No softened edges or romantic filters. Just life, as it happened.
I still feel like an idiot.
Good, because you were, but an understandable one.
Maya stirred her tea thoughtfully.
At least now you can drop the whole arranged relationship act, right? Since you're obviously actually interested in him.
Darcy opened her mouth to protest, then closed it.
Is it that obvious?
Honey, Pablo is more subtle about his feelings, and he tried to fight a moose this morning.
Darcy traced her finger around the rim of her coffee cup.
I like him. The real him. Not the version I could turn into a character. The way he tells stories. How he notices everything but tries to fade into the background. How he...
She groaned, dropping her head to the table.
I like him. God, I'm in trouble.
You're in something.
Maya agreed cheerfully.
Now you just have to figure out what to do about it.
Besides thanking him to death?
Besides that.
The dining room gradually emptied as artists drifted back to their projects. Callum never appeared.
He'll turn up,
Maya said quietly.
This place isn't that big. Yeah.
Darcy gathered her tablet, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest.
I just hope when he does, I can manage a normal human conversation.
Baby steps. Maybe aim for less than 5 thank yous next time.
4 is my final offer.
Maya's laugh echoed in the empty dining room, but Darcy couldn't help noticing how strange the space felt without Callum's quiet presence in his corner. She hadn't drawn him in any of her sketches, she realized. The empty space where he should have been felt like its own kind of artwork. Chapter 14. Exposed. Darcy was gathering her tablet when Rose appeared, slightly out of breath and beaming.
There you are. Callum's looking for you. He's on the back observation deck.
Maya raised an eyebrow.
The one with the perfect view of sunset over the lake?
The very same.
Rose's smile turned knowing.
Though it's a bit early for sunset.
Did he say why?
Something about photos. And an apology, though I'm not sure what for.
Rose linked her arm through Darcy's.
Come on, I'll show you the way.
The observation deck stretched out over the edge of the property, offering an unobstructed view of the frozen lake below. Callum stood at the railing, a portfolio case at his feet, snow gathering in his hair like he'd been waiting a while.
Found her!
Rose announced cheerfully, giving Darcy a gentle push forward before retreating to what she probably thought was a discreet distance.
Hi.
Darcy managed, her earlier panic trying to resurface.
I'm sorry about...
I'm sorry,
Callum said at the same time.
I shouldn't have looked at your work without permission. It was private, unfinished, and
He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging snow.
I crossed a line.
No, I'm the one who...
Please.
He held up a hand.
Let me finish?
When she nodded, he crouched to open the portfolio case.
I wanted to show you something, to make it fair.
He pulled out a stack of photos, handling them with reverent care.
I haven't shown these to anyone, not since...
He swallowed.
Richard was the last person to see my work, before everything happened in Syria.
Darcy's breath caught as he handed her the first photo. Dawn light catching on ice crystals, transforming a simple pine branch into something magical. The next showed a moose at the lake's edge, its reflection perfect in the still water. Then a series of candid shots, artists lost in their work, joy radiating from every frame.
These are beautiful,
she whispered.
They're real.
His voice was soft.
That's what Richard taught me. Beauty isn't about perfection, it's about truth.
He hesitated before offering the final stack.
These are from today.
Darcy's heart stopped. There she was, laughing in the snow with Pablo, sketching in the dining room, her face peaceful. Standing among the pines, looking up at their snow-laden branches with wonder.
I should have asked first,
he said quickly.
But you just looked so...
He gestured helplessly.
Real.
She traced a finger over one image, herself in profile, smiling at something Maya had said, light catching in her hair.
Is this how you see me?
Yes.
The word was barely a whisper.
I know it's not the polished version from your comics, but
It's better.
She looked up at him, finding his eyes intense with something she wasn't ready to name.
It's true.
Snow fell softly around them. In the distance, a camera clicked.
I think,
Callum said carefully,
we might both be guilty of trying to capture something real while being afraid to live it.
Maybe.
Darcy admitted.
But at least we're both bad at it?
His laugh was surprised and genuine.
Is that your way of saying we're perfect for each other?
No, that's my way of saying.
She stopped, realizing what he'd said. What she'd almost said. The air between them crackled with possibility. Click,
Rose.
they said in unison, not looking away from each other.
Don't mind me.
Came the cheerful reply.
Just documenting the moment. For posterity. And Instagram, but mostly posterity.
Callum's eyes crinkled at the corners.
We should probably talk about everything.
Yeah,
Darcy clutched the photos like a lifeline.
but maybe somewhere with fewer photographers.
I know a place.
He gathered the portfolio, then hesitated.
Unless you need to thank me several more times first.
Her startled laugh echoed across the lake.
I hate that you heard all that.
I counted 6 thanks, actually.
It was 7.
She buried her face in her hands.
Can we pretend the last hour never happened?
Never.
His smile was soft.
It was real.
And maybe, Darcy thought as she followed him back inside, that was exactly what they both needed. Behind them, Rose's camera clicked one final time, capturing the moment they both chose truth over perfection. Chapter 15. Playing with Fire.
The stables?
Darcy asked as they crunched through fresh snow.
I didn't know the lodge had.
Fire!
Maya's voice cut through the winter air as she came running toward them, her artist's smock billowing.
Edward's done it again. The workshop.
Before she could finish, Callum was already sprinting toward the plume of black smoke rising behind the lodge. Darcy and Maya ran after him, arriving to find the workshop's windows glowing orange.
It's fine.
Edward's voice came from inside.
The metal's just expressing itself.
Edward,
Callum shouted, pulling his flannel shirt over his nose.
get out of there.
But the crystallization process.
Callum disappeared into the smoke-filled doorway. Darcy's heart leaped into her throat as seconds stretched into eternity. Then Callum emerged, half dragging a protesting Edward, whose eyebrows were significantly lighter than they had been at lunch.
My sculpture!
Edward struggled weakly.
I'll get it,
Callum promised, depositing Edward in Maya's care. Before anyone could stop him, he plunged back into the workshop.
Is this a regular occurrence?
Darcy asked, trying to keep her voice steady.
The fires are Callum's heroics.
Maya grinned despite the situation.
Because watching him carry people out of danger while his muscles ripple under that smoke-stained Henley is definitely becoming my favorite lodge amenity.
Maya.
What? I'm just saying the way he... Oh, look, speaking of rippling muscles.
Callum emerged again, dragging a fire extinguisher and wearing a face mask he'd apparently found inside. They watched him methodically battle the flames until only steam remained.
My hero.
Edward sighed dramatically.
Though you really didn't need to save me. The fire was completely intentional this time.
That's what worries me,
Callum muttered, pulling off the mask. His face was smudged with soot, hair damp with sweat, and Darcy had to physically stop herself from reaching up to wipe his cheek.
So,
Maya sidled up to Darcy as they watched Callum secure the workshop.
how did the observation deck go? Before we so rudely interrupted with our little inferno.
He showed me his photos.
Darcy said softly.
They were beautiful. Real. He was going to take me somewhere to talk, but...
Ooh, somewhere private?
Maya waggled her eyebrows.
A special place he knows? Do tell.
Not like that.
Sure, honey. I'm sure he just wants to show you his photography equipment.
I hate you.
You love me. Almost as much as you love watching him play firefighter.
Maya nodded toward where Callum was helping Edward salvage what remained of his sculpture.
Though I noticed you didn't deny it this time.
Darcy couldn't help watching the way Callum's shoulders moved as he lifted twisted metal. How gentle he was with both Edward's art and Edward's wounded pride.
That's what I thought.
Maya said smugly.
Now about this special place he knows.
Don't you have your own art to work on?
Please, this is way more interesting than my pottery. Speaking of which, maybe I should start a fire in my kiln.
Don't you dare.
Just a small one, for romance's sake.
Maya.
But she was laughing, and so was Maya. And across the workshop yard, Callum looked up at the sound. Their eyes met, and even through the soot and sweat, his smile made her heart skip.
Oh yeah,
Maya whispered.
you're in deep, girl. Better hope that special place of his has good lighting. For the photos, of course.
Of course.
Darcy echoed, not looking away from Callum.
Just the photos.
They both knew she was lying. Chapter 16. Getting ready.
I'm sorry about the spot I wanted to show you,
Callum said, running a hand through his soot-streaked hair.
It's a bit of a hike, and with darkness coming.
He glanced at the setting sun.
You mean getting lost in the wilderness wasn't part of today's adventure schedule?
Darcy grinned.
After the moose and the fire, I just assumed we were working our way through a disaster bingo card.
His eyes crinkled at the corners.
Maybe we should save something for tomorrow.
Avalanche, perhaps? Bigfoot sighting?
I'll see what I can arrange.
He looked down at his smoke-stained clothes.
I should probably clean up before dinner. Hope to see you there.
Yeah,
Darcy managed, suddenly very aware of how he'd said, hope.
I'll be there.
Maya waited approximately 2 seconds after Callum walked away before grabbing Darcy's arm.
Come on, I want to show you something before we beautify you for dinner.
Beautify me?
Trust me.
Maya dragged her into the workshop, now aired out and smelling more of smoke than flames.
But first, meet my baby.
A half-finished pot sat abandoned on Maya's wheel, its curves elegant despite the interruption.
Edward's timing could have been better.
Maya sighed, running her fingers along the rim.
Though I suppose watching Callum play hero made up for it.
You're terrible,
says the woman who couldn't take her eyes off his heroic everything.
Darcy picked up a small finished piece from Maya's shelf.
At least I'm not the one who makes suspiciously phallic vases.
They're artistic interpretations of natural forms.
Maya snatched the vase away, grinning.
Besides, some of us have to sublimate our desires into clay. We can't all have mountain men offering to take us to their special spots.
That's not what he...
Darcy stopped at Maya's gleeful expression.
You know what? At least my comic doesn't include pottery innuendos.
Yet, there's still time.
Maya linked their arms.
Now come on, let's get you ready for dinner. I'm thinking that sweater that shows just enough collarbone to be interesting.
Back in Darcy's cabin, Maya rummaged through her suitcase while Pablo supervised from his window seat.
This.
She held up a deep green sweater.
It matches his eyes.
You're ridiculous.
I'm helpful. Unlike some people who make fun of my perfectly innocent pottery.
Innocent? That last bowl looked like it was advertising for OnlyFans.
It was a study in organic forms.
Maya tossed the sweater at Darcy's head.
Now put this on and let me work my magic.
I thought you were a potter, not a fairy godmother.
Honey, tonight I'm whatever gets you to stop thanking people 7 times and start actually talking to them.
Says the woman who named her vibrator Bob.
Better than naming him after a mountain man, though.
Maya ducked as Darcy threw a pillow at her.
I'm just saying, the real thing looks much more interesting than any battery-operated.
Out!
But Darcy was laughing.
Go get ready in your own cabin.
Fine, but wear the sweater. And maybe those jeans that make your...
Goodbye, Maya.
Pablo watched Maya leave, then gave Darcy a look that clearly said, the green sweater isn't the worst idea.
Not you too.
Darcy sighed, but she was already pulling it on. The sweater did match Callum's eyes. Not that she was thinking about that. Much. Chapter 17. Christmas Lights. Maya was waiting on her porch, wrapped in a shawl that sparkled with tiny fairy lights.
I knew you'd wear the sweater.
Like I had a choice.
Darcy tugged self-consciously at the hem.
Pablo sat on everything else I laid out.
Smart cat.
Maya looped her arm through Darcy's as they walked.
He knows green is your color.
The lodge's windows glowed warmly against the darkening sky, wreaths adorning everyone. Inside, the transformation took Darcy's breath away. Twinkling lights draped the ceiling beams, their reflection dancing in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Pine garlands wound around columns, filling the air with fresh winter scent. The fireplace crackled invitingly, casting flickering shadows across walls now decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Her fingers itched for her tablet, wanting to capture the way the lights played across crystal glasses, how the shadows softened every edge. But for once, she didn't reach for it. Some moments deserved to stay lived rather than captured.
There he is,
Maya whispered, nudging Darcy. Callum stood near the fireplace, cleaned up and changed into a dark blue sweater that made his eyes look even greener. He was examining one of Edward's smaller sculptures that had somehow survived the afternoon's excitement. Their eyes met across the room, and Darcy's carefully prepared greeting dissolved.
Go.
Maya gave her a gentle push.
I'll be at the bar, drinking enough wine to forget I'm single.
Maya.
Shoo. Go be adorably awkward together.
Callum met her halfway.
Hi.
Hi.
She gestured vaguely at the decorations.
This is... wow.
Rose is doing. She says twinkle lights solve everything.
His eyes traced over her sweater.
Green suits you.
Maya's doing. She says sweaters solve everything.
Smart woman.
He nodded toward a quiet corner table.
Join me?
The table sat in a cozy alcove, partially screened by a decorated pine tree. Candlelight caught the silver threads in the tablecloth, and somewhere nearby, soft carols played.
I feel underdressed.
Darcy admitted as they sat.
I didn't realize dinner would be so...
Aggressively festive?
His eyes crinkled.
Rose goes all out for Christmas. Says it's good for the soul.
A server appeared with wine, disappearing as quietly as they'd arrived. Across the room, Darcy caught Maya at the bar, giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up while ordering what looked like her third glass.
About this afternoon,
Callum started.
Which part? The thank you avalanche or the actual fire?
Both, neither.
He traced the stem of his wine glass.
I wanted to say, your comics. They're more than just stories, aren't they?
Darcy's chest tightened. She looked down at her hands, remembering how many times they'd drawn pain into punchlines.
They started as a way to process things. Bad dates, worse relationships. If I could draw it, I could control it. Make it funny instead of...
She swallowed.
But then people started reading them, relating to them. And suddenly I was turning real people into characters without their permission.
Is that what you think you're doing to me?
Her head snapped up. His eyes held hers, intense in the candlelight.
The
truth stuck in her throat.
Because I think,
he said softly,
you might be doing the opposite. Your art strips away pretense, shows truth through humor, like my photos try to capture truth through light.
The wine warmed her chest. Or maybe it was the way he looked at her across the candlelight.
Speaking of photos, I can't believe you caught that moment with Pablo and the moose this morning.
Caught is a relative term. I was actually trying to photograph the sunrise when this crazy woman decided to take her cat for a walk.
In my defense, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
That's what Edward says about his fires.
His eyes crinkled as he took a sip of wine.
Though I have to admit, your disaster was more photogenic.
More photogenic than fire?
Much more interesting subject matter.
The way he said it made her cheeks warm.
Do you always flirt through photography metaphors?
Only when beautiful women fall into my arms before breakfast.
He leaned forward slightly.
Though usually they don't thank me quite so thoroughly.
Oh God.
She buried her face in her hands.
I was hoping you'd forgotten that part.
Never. It was...
His voice softened.
Adorable, actually.
She peeked through her fingers to find him watching her with that intense look again.
Adorable isn't usually what I'm going for.
No?
He raised an eyebrow.
What are you going for?
Would you believe sophisticated artist with her life together, who definitely doesn't fall on handsome photographers, or let her cat challenge local wildlife?
Handsome,
That's what you took from that?
It's what I'm choosing to focus on.
His smile was dangerous in the candlelight.
Professionally speaking.
Is that what we're doing? Speaking professionally?
I don't typically offer to show professional acquaintances my secret spots in the mountains.
The way he said it made her stomach flip.
No?
No.
He reached across the table, his fingers barely brushing hers.
Just the ones who make me laugh, who see beauty in real moments, who thank me 7 times in 30 seconds.
It was only 6 times.
7, I counted.
His thumb traced circles on her wrist.
I liked every single one.
The candlelight caught his eyes, turning them into something from one of her more romantic panels. Except she hadn't drawn this. Couldn't have drawn this. The electricity between them was too real, too raw to capture in lines and color.
Tell me about your favorite photo,
she said, partly to distract herself from how his touch was making her feel, partly because she genuinely wanted to know.
Besides this morning's series?
But his expression turned thoughtful.
There's this one I took last fall. A fox in the early morning fog, just as the sun was rising. She was carrying a piece of bread, probably stolen from our kitchen. But she looked so proud, so unapologetically herself.
His free hand moved as he spoke, sketching the scene in the air.
I must have taken 100 photos of her, but I've never shown them to anyone.
Why not?
Some things,
He looked down at where their fingers had somehow become intertwined.
some things feel too personal to share, too real.
Like Richard's photos?
His hand tightened slightly on hers.
Yeah, though maybe
He met her eyes.
Maybe some things are meant to be shared, with the right person. What about you?
He asked, his thumb still tracing patterns on her wrist that made it hard to think.
Where's your favorite place to draw?
You'll laugh.
Probably. Tell me anyway.
Darcy took a sip of wine for courage.
There's this tiny coffee shop in Toronto. Nothing special about it, really. Bad lighting, uncomfortable chairs, coffee that tastes like heated motor oil. But there's this window seat that looks out over this alley. And
She paused, wondering if she should admit this part.
And?
He leaned closer, firelight dancing across his features.
it's where I drew my first comic. I was hiding there after this absolutely horrible date. The guy spent 2 hours explaining why my art style wasn't authentic enough.
She rolled her eyes at the memory.
So I started sketching him, but making him ridiculous. Gave him a tiny top hat, a handlebar mustache. Started adding thought bubbles full of pretentious quotes.
Please tell me this made it into the comic.
Issue number 1.
She grinned.
Though I did change the top hat to a beret. For legal reasons.
Of course.
His eyes sparkled.
Very professional.
Exactly. I have standards.
She tried to maintain a serious expression, but his thumb was still drawing circles on her skin, and the wine was making everything feel soft and possible.
Anyway, I still go there sometimes. When I need to remember why I started drawing in the first place.
To make horrible dates bearable?
To make real life a little more magical.
The words slipped out before she could stop them.
Even when it hurts.
His expression turned gentle.
Like turning a clumsy fall into a meet cute?
You know about meet cutes?
I own a romantic mountain lodge. Rose made me watch every Hallmark movie ever made for research.
And what did your research tell you about falling artists with badly behaved cats?
That they're worth catching.
His voice dropped lower, making her shiver.
Every time.
The server appeared with their plates. Venison for him, pasta for her, momentarily breaking the spell between them. But as they settled into their meal, Darcy noticed Callum's hand drift to his camera strap again, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as self-soothing.
Can I ask?
She started carefully.
You don't have to answer, but what happened? In Syria?
His fork paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, she thought she'd pushed too far, but then he set it down, his fingers finding hers again as if drawing strength from the contact.
I was documenting a story about rebuilding efforts in Aleppo,
he said quietly.
Local artists creating beauty in the aftermath of war. It was supposed to be about hope.
His thumb stilled on her wrist.
Until it wasn't.
She waited, letting him find the words.
There was this little girl. She'd been painting murals on broken walls, turning bullet holes into flower centers.
A shadow crossed his face.
I was photographing her work when the building collapsed. Not from fighting, just old damage finally giving way. I got her out, but I couldn't save her brother.
Callum.
I kept taking photos after. Couldn't stop. Like if I documented enough beauty, it would somehow balance out.
He swallowed hard.
Richard found me 6 months later, still in Syria, barely eating, just capturing everything I could. He practically dragged me back here. Gave me the lodge in his will a year later. Said I needed roots more than I needed wings.
His eyes met hers across the candlelight.
I haven't shown anyone my photos since then. Built walls. Kept things professional. Safe.
His fingers tightened on hers.
Until this morning, when this crazy woman with a cat made me want to start capturing moments again.
No pressure or anything.
She tried to joke, her heart aching for him.
That's just it.
His smile was soft, genuine.
For the first time in years, it doesn't feel like pressure, but...
He took a breath.
I might need some patience with all this. With
letting someone see the real you?
She finished quietly.
Through your lens instead of mine?
Yeah.
He looked almost surprised at her understanding.
I'm not very good at opening up, obviously.
Says the man who just shared his darkest moment over dinner.
Only because you make me feel...
He searched for the right word.
Safe. Real. Like maybe the walls aren't as necessary as I thought.
Darcy noticed their plates were nearly empty, though she couldn't remember eating. The server silently cleared their dishes, replacing them with rich chocolate desserts and fresh glasses of wine. The dining room had grown quieter, more intimate. Other guests gradually drifting away until their corner felt like its own world.
You know what's funny?
She traced the rim of her wine glass.
Everyone assumes because I draw myself traveling in the comic that I must have been everywhere. But I've never...
She smiled self-consciously.
I have this list. Places I want to see. Real ones. Not just backgrounds I research for panels.
Tell me,
he said softly.
Paris, obviously. But not tourist Paris. I want to find tiny cafés where artists still sketch in notebooks instead of tablets. Florence in the spring, when everything's blooming. This little bookshop in Porto I read about once, with carved wooden stairs and cats living in the stacks.
You do have a thing for cats in interesting places,
he teased gently.
Pablo would love Europe. All those sunny windowsills to judge people from.
She took a bite of chocolate cake, closing her eyes briefly at the richness.
But I keep putting it off, using work as an excuse. It's easier to draw adventures than live them.
Why?
Because...
She set down her fork, choosing honesty over pride.
Because drawing life is safer than living it. If I mess up a panel, I can just start over. Real life doesn't have an undo button.
No,
he agreed, reaching across to brush a crumb from the corner of her mouth. The touch sent electricity down her spine.
But maybe that's what makes it worth drawing. Worth living.
The candle between them had burned lower, casting dancing shadows across his features. She couldn't remember the last time minutes had felt so full, so real, so dangerous. A group of artists near the fireplace began singing Silent Night, their voices harmonizing in the candlelit room. Rose had appeared with sheet music from somewhere, conducting with enthusiastic gestures.
Should we join them?
Darcy asked, watching Edward attempt a particularly ambitious descant.
Only if you want everyone to flee in terror. I've been told my singing voice could frighten the moose away.
Worse than Pablo's morning yowls?
Much worse. Richard used to say I should record it as a bear deterrent.
She laughed, feeling warm and light from the wine, the music, the way he was looking at her. The carolers switched to Oh Holy Night, and without thinking, she shifted her chair closer to his, leaning slightly against his shoulder to watch the impromptu performance. He stiffened for just a moment before relaxing, his arm moving to rest along the back of her chair. Not quite holding her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Smell that mix of pine and coffee that seemed to follow him.
This is nice,
she murmured, more to herself than him.
Yeah.
His fingers brushed her shoulder, so lightly she might have imagined it.
Though I think some of us are feeling more Christmas spirit than others.
As if on cue, Maya's voice rose above the carolers.
That's not how Deck the Halls goes. The fa-la-las are supposed to be passionate.
From the bar, Maya's laugh rang out, followed by the distinct sound of someone ordering another round.
I should probably rescue the bartender.
Callum smiled, standing. He offered his hand.
Walk you both home after?
Darcy took his hand, trying not to focus on how perfectly her fingers fit between his.
Somebody should. I think Maya's trying to drink away her pottery innuendos.
Her what?
Trust me, you don't want to know.
His thumb brushed across her knuckles, sending sparks up her arm.
I'm finding I want to know a lot of things lately.
The look in his eyes made her breath catch. Before she could respond, Maya's voice carried across the room.
The mountains aren't the only things that are peaked around here.
And that's our cue.
Callum laughed, but he didn't let go of her hand as they went to collect their thoroughly festive friend. Darcy thought about her tablet, sitting untouched in her cabin. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to turn this moment into content. Some things were better left undrawn, even if Maya's drunken commentary definitely deserved its own chapter. Chapter 18. Winter's Heat. The walk back was slower than necessary, Maya weaving between them as she continued her passionate critique of traditional carol arrangements. Snow fell in lazy spirals, catching in Callum's hair and on Darcy's eyelashes.
And another thing,
Maya declared as they reached her cabin.
The 12 days of Christmas are completely impractical. Who has room for all those birds?
Let's get you inside.
Darcy laughed, fumbling with Maya's keys.
Wait.
Maya grabbed the door frame with surprising coordination.
I need to inspect something in my cabin, alone, for at least 2 minutes.
She attempted to wink at Darcy and managed to blink both eyes instead. Before either could respond, Maya had disappeared inside, though her voice carried through the door.
2 minutes, unless you need more. Time management is important.
Darcy turned to Callum, mortification warring with laughter.
I'm so sorry. She's not usually so...
Subtle?
His eyes crinkled as he stepped closer.
I was going to say matchmaker-y, but...
The words died in her throat as his hand came up to brush snow from her cheek.
Darcy.
Her name was barely a whisper. Then he was kissing her. And oh, this wasn't like any panel she'd ever drawn, any scene she'd ever imagined. His lips were warm despite the cold, his hand tangling in her hair as she melted against him. She tasted wine and chocolate and possibility, felt the solid strength of him as her fingers curled into his sweater. The world narrowed to points of sensation, his hand in her hair, the brush of his nose against her cheek, the way his breath caught when she pressed closer. Snow fell around them in silent benediction, but she barely felt the cold. Time stretched like honey, sweet and slow and infinite. This was what her art had always reached for. This suspended moment where everything else fell away. No panels to draw, no stories to tell, just the reality of his mouth on hers, his heartbeat strong under her palms, the slight tremor in his fingers as they traced her jaw. She could live in this moment forever, she thought distantly. Draw it in endless variations and never quite capture how it felt to finally be.
Get it, girl.
Maya's voice shattered the moment. They broke apart to find her hanging out her window, grinning like a drunk Cheshire cat.
That was way better than pottery.
Callum pressed his forehead to Darcy's, laughing softly.
I should go.
Yeah,
But she didn't move away.
Tomorrow?
tomorrow.
He kissed her once more, quick and sweet, before disappearing into the snowy night.
That
Maya announced as Darcy helped her into bed.
was hot. Like kiln firing temperatures hot.
Drink your Gatorade.
I'm just saying, if you need to borrow Bob.
Good night, Maya.
Back in her own cabin, Darcy touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. Pablo watched from his window seat as she moved around the room, unable to settle. Everything felt electric, alive, real. She drew a bath, letting the steam fill the room with the scent of vanilla and jasmine. As she sank into the warm water, her mind drifted to strong hands and green eyes, to the way his muscles had moved under that sweater, to how his touch had left trails of fire on her skin. Her hand slipped beneath the surface as she recalled his kiss, remembering the strength in his fingers, imagining how they might feel elsewhere. Pablo chose that moment to knock her private relaxation aids off the bathroom counter with a judgmental meow.
Really?
She called out to her cat,
Now?
but perhaps it was for the best. Some fantasies were better saved for when she wasn't at risk of drowning in a bubble bath. Though later, alone in her bed with her imagination and her favorite battery-operated companion, she had to admit, Maya might have been right about letting go of control sometimes. Some moments were better lived than drawn, even if only in fantasy. For now. Chapter 19. Morning after. Pablo's paw batting at her nose woke Darcy from dreams filled with snow and kisses and possibilities. He sat on her chest, harness dangling from his mouth, golden eyes full of adventure.
Absolutely not.
She removed the harness from his teeth.
The moose incident was a one-time performance. We're not doing an encore.
Pablo dropped the harness and gave her a look that clearly said, coward.
Don't judge me. Some of us learn from our mistakes.
She touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of last night's kiss.
Most mistakes, anyway.
A weak knock at her door preceded Maya's groan.
If you're awake, I need coffee. And possibly death.
Darcy let her friend stumble in, noting Maya's designer sunglasses worn indoors and her death grip on an empty Gatorade bottle.
That bad?
I tried to teach Edward sculpture interpretive dance.
Maya collapsed onto Darcy's couch, Pablo immediately claiming her lap.
There's video evidence.
Of course there is.
Darcy started the coffee maker, grateful she'd thought to unpack it yesterday.
Rose?
Posted it to the lodge's Instagram story. I'm now trending as drunk pottery lady does the nutcracker.
Better than woman lets cat fight moose.
Speaking of fighting wildlife.
Maya managed a weak grin.
That was quite a kiss last night. When's the sequel?
Darcy busied herself with mugs, hoping to hide her blush.
Shouldn't you be too hungover for matchmaking?
I'm never too anything for matchmaking, besides.
Maya accepted the fresh coffee with grabby hands.
Someone needs to counteract your self-sabotaging tendencies.
I do not.
You turned 3 years of dating into comic fodder.
That's different. That was...
Darcy stared into her coffee.
processing.
And now?
Now it's...
She thought of Callum's photos, how he captured real moments without softening their edges, how he trusted her with his pain, his walls, how easily she could turn this into content, into something safe and contained and ultimately false.
complicated.
Pablo meowed imperiously, abandoning Maya to paw at the window. Outside, fresh snow blanketed everything, and somewhere in the distance, a moose watched the lodge with what Darcy swore was amusement.
He's different.
Maya said quietly.
You know that, right? The way he looks at you. That's not comic material. That's real.
That's what scares me.
The words slipped out before she could stop them.
Good.
Maya winced as she sat up straighter.
Real should be scary. Otherwise, it's just another panel in your comfort zone.
When did you get so wise?
Somewhere between my 5th and 6th wine spritzer. Though that might have been when I was explaining to Rose why all my pots look vaguely phallic.
You didn't.
I definitely did. Very eloquently with hand gestures.
Maya squinted at her through designer frames.
But we're not changing the subject. You like him.
Yeah.
He likes you.
Maybe.
He kissed you like a Hallmark movie finale.
Maya?
And you're already planning how to turn it into content instead of living it.
Darcy's protest died in her throat. Outside, the moose ambled past, Pablo tracking its movement with predatory focus. Some things, she realized, couldn't be safely contained in panels and punchlines. Some things demanded to be lived, even if they might hurt.
Oh God, I think the room is spinning again. Please tell me you have more Gatorade. And maybe a time machine so I can unteach Edward Sculpture the robot.
Just Gatorade and ibuprofen.
It'll do.
Maya accepted both gratefully.
But don't think this gets you out of talking about last night. Once my head stops trying to escape my body, we're discussing that kiss in detail. And your tendency to hide behind your art when things get real.
Only if we discuss your drunk pottery interpretive dance first.
Deal. But first coffee, so much coffee.
Maya squinted at her watch.
Also, don't we have that Christmas Eve breakfast thing in an hour?
What Christmas Eve breakfast thing?
The mandatory festive one? With the whole lodge? Where you'll have to face the guy who kissed you senseless while I was pretending not to watch from my window.
Pablo chose that moment to knock the harness off the table as if to say, at least a moose would be less complicated. He wasn't wrong.
So?
Darcy settled back with her coffee.
About this interpretive dance. I need details.
Apparently, and this is according to Rose's Instagram captions, I decided Edward's melted metal sculpture needed movement interpretation. Started with basic ballet positions, which wouldn't have been so bad if I'd been wearing something other than my pottery apron.
Please tell me you had clothes under the apron.
Thankfully. Though the part where I tried to demonstrate how the sculpture's fluid dynamics matched the sugar plum fairy variation.
Maya buried her face in a throw pillow.
Let's just say my pirouettes aren't what they used to be. Rose got the exact moment I spun into the Christmas tree.
That explains the pine needles in your hair.
Does it explain why I tried to convince Edward to be my dance partner? Poor man was still mourning his melted sculpture. But there I was, insisting he needed to feel the emotional resonance through interpretive dance. Rose has video of him attempting a very reluctant pas de deux with his own artwork, but speaking of emotional resonance.
Don't.
That kiss though, I mean, damn, the way he just...
Maya made a gesture that was definitely not appropriate for the ballet.
If that's how he kisses in public, imagine how he...
Maya.
What? I'm just saying Bob might get jealous. Though from what I saw, those hands of his could probably...
We are not discussing Callum's hands before breakfast.
Fine. We'll discuss them after breakfast. In detail, with diagrams.
I hate you.
You love me. Now.
Maya stood, swaying only slightly.
Let's get you dressed for this breakfast. That green sweater worked wonders last night, but for Christmas Eve...
She was already heading for Darcy's closet.
We need something festive. Something that says I'm not thinking about your hands at all.
I thought we weren't discussing his hands.
We're not. We're discussing what you're going to wear while not discussing his hands.
Maya emerged with a red sweater dress Darcy had forgotten she packed.
This. With those boots that make your legs look amazing. And maybe that necklace that draws attention to your...
You're supposed to be hungover.
Honey, I could be literally dying and I'd still make sure you look good enough to give Mountain Man some new photography inspiration.
Maya's grin turned wicked.
Private collection stuff.
Pablo watched them from his window seat, radiating judgment as Maya transformed Darcy's bedroom into what she called a Christmas romance war room.
The key
Maya declared, wielding a mascara wand like a conductor's baton.
is to look like you're not trying to look like you're thinking about last night's kiss, while definitely making him think about last night's kiss.
That made no sense.
Trust me. By the time I'm done, he won't be able to focus on his pancakes.
Maya paused thoughtfully.
Though maybe avoid the syrup. Sticky situations should wait until at least the third date.
Maya!
What? I'm just helping you live in the moment instead of drawing it.
Her voice softened.
Besides, your blush is doing half my work for me.
40 minutes later, Darcy had to admit Maya knew what she was doing. The sweater dress was festive without trying too hard. The boots were practical enough for snow while still being cute, and her hair fell in soft waves that looked artlessly perfect.
There.
Maya stepped back to admire her work.
Now you look like a Hallmark movie heroine who definitely isn't planning to jump the sexy lodge owner under the mistletoe.
I hate you.
You'll thank me later. Possibly under the mistletoe.
Pablo meowed his opinion of their priorities, nosing hopefully at his empty food bowl. At least someone's desires were simple. Chapter 20. Ghosts.
Aren't you going to get ready?
Darcy asked as they stepped out into the snow. Maya still in her rumpled clothes from yesterday.
Honey, I'm wearing sunglasses worth more than most people's cars. That's as ready as this hangover's allowing.
Maya linked their arms.
Besides, everyone was there for my dance recital. The bar is already on the floor.
The lodge glowed with Christmas Eve warmth, wreaths in every window catching the morning light. Inside, the breakfast buffet stretched along one wall, steam rising from chafers while holiday music played softly. The tree they'd watched Callum wrestle with days ago now sparkled with hundreds of tiny lights. Darcy's heart did a little flip when she spotted Callum by the coffee station. He looked up as if sensing her presence, and the smile that spread across his face made her forget how to breathe. Then a woman's voice cut through the holiday music.
Cal!
Darcy watched Callum freeze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. A striking woman with a professional camera slung across her chest strode through the door, shaking snow from short dark hair.
Claire.
The name fell from his lips like a prayer or a curse.
What are you
doing here?
She closed the distance between them, her smile intimate with shared history.
Had a shoot in Vancouver. Thought I'd stop by, see how Richard's lodge is treating you.
Maya's hand tightened on Darcy's arm.
That's not good.
She whispered.
You know her?
Know of her? She's...
Cal, you haven't changed a thing in here.
Claire was saying, her hand casual on Callum's arm.
Richard would be proud.
The coffee station stood next to the buffet line, and as Maya steered Darcy toward the plates of eggs and pancakes, they couldn't help but overhear. Darcy focused intently on spooning fruit onto her plate, trying to look like she wasn't listening to the conversation happening 3 feet away. Something in her chest tightened at the way Callum relaxed under Claire's touch, the familiar shortening of his name, the easy way they fell into conversation. She nearly dropped the serving spoon when Claire leaned in closer, their bodies angled toward each other with unconscious familiarity. Maya guided them to a table nearby, close enough to still catch snippets of conversation over the soft holiday music, but far enough to maintain the illusion they weren't eavesdropping.
Still having the dreams?
Claire asked softly.
Sometimes, less now.
Good. I worried after...
I know, you did what you could.
Not enough. Not when you were holding that little boy's hand stuck there in the rubble. And I couldn't.
Claire's voice caught.
God, Cal, I still see it. You singing to him in broken Arabic while I ran for help. By the time I got back with the rescue team...
She touched his camera strap, a gesture heavy with shared history.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up. Not at Christmas.
Hey.
Callum touched her shoulder.
You ran for help. That's more than I could do. I just sat there, holding his hand, watching him slip away.
The pancakes on Darcy's plate turned to ash in her mouth. Maya kicked her gently under the table, but Darcy couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene by the coffee station. The way Claire and Callum seemed to fold into their shared grief, the rest of the festive breakfast room fading away around them. Darcy's fork clattered against her plate. Maya again kicked her gently under the table.
They were engaged.
Maya murmured.
Before Syria. Before the collapse.
Oh.
The word felt small, inadequate. Callum and Claire drifted toward the window, their voices lost in the breakfast chatter and Christmas music. But Darcy couldn't stop watching them. The unconscious dance of two people who'd known each other's darkness. Claire laughed at something Callum said, her hand brushing his arm. He ducked his head in that way Darcy had thought was just for her, but now she saw it for what it was. A habit, a pattern, a movement worn smooth by years of intimacy.
Don't.
Maya's voice cut through her spiral.
I know that look. That's your I'm about to turn this into tragic content look.
I'm not.
You are. You're already writing the story in your head. Poor comic artist can't compete with the sophisticated photojournalist who shares his trauma.
Maya leaned forward.
But you're missing something huge here.
What? The way she instinctively knows how to comfort him? How they speak in shorthand about things I'll never understand? The fact that she was there for his worst moment while I'm just...
The fact that they're not together anymore.
Maya interrupted.
Think about it. They went through hell together. They had years of history, and yet...
She gestured at Claire's bare ring finger.
Sometimes sharing trauma isn't enough. Sometimes it's too much.
Darcy pushed her eggs around her plate.
Maybe they just need time. Maybe now that they've both healed.
Or maybe...
Maya said firmly.
You're so scared of real connection that you're looking for reasons this won't work. Using them as an excuse to run back to your safe little panels where you control everything.
I'm not.
But she was, wasn't she? Already sketching the scene in her mind. Already figuring out how to turn this knife twist in her chest into something she could contain in boxes and bubbles. She watched them over coffee and cooling eggs. The way they moved in practiced orbits, the shared language of trauma in their gestures. When Claire adjusted Callum's camera strap with thoughtless intimacy, Darcy saw years of history in the motion. What was her kiss in the snow compared to that? What were her comic panels compared to their shared darkness?
What is she doing here?
Rose's voice cut through their conversation, sharp with unusual anger. She dropped into the empty chair beside Maya, her ever-present phone nowhere in sight.
Of all the days.
You know her?
Know her?
Rose's eyes narrowed as she watched Claire and Callum by the window.
I know how she operates. She's got a sixth sense for when Callum starts to heal, to hope. Then she breezes through like a storm, stirring up all his old ghosts.
Rose's hands clenched on the tablecloth.
And the worst part, he can't see it. She shows up with her war stories and shared trauma, and he gets pulled right back into that darkness. Every single time.
Darcy felt the blood drain from her face. Across the room, Claire was showing Callum something on her camera, their heads bent together over the display. The easy intimacy of the gesture felt like a physical blow.
The last time,
Rose continued, her voice tight.
She stayed for 3 days. It took weeks for him to smile again after she left. And now, just when he's finally...
She glanced at Darcy, something like protective fury in her eyes.
Just when he's finally letting light back in.
As if on cue, Claire touched Callum's arm, drawing his attention back to her camera screen.
Remember that little CAFO sea in Aleppo? The one where we...
She trailed off meaningfully, and Darcy watched the shadows creep back into Callum's eyes, his shoulders tensing, his whole body curving inward around old pain. Then, as if sensing her gaze, Callum looked up and caught sight of Darcy. The transformation was immediate. His face brightened, shoulders straightening, eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that usually made her heart flutter. For a moment, she saw what Rose meant about letting light back in. But that only made it worse, because now she could see it. The stark contrast between who he was with Claire and who he was trying to be with her. How could she compete with someone who understood his darkest moments? How could she be anything but a temporary distraction, a brief splash of color before the shadows pulled him back?
Darcy.
Maya started, reaching for her hand.
I should go.
She stood, her chair scraping too loudly against the floor.
I need to work. Deadline.
She felt Callum's eyes on her as she fled, but he didn't call out, didn't follow. Of course he didn't. Her cabin felt cold despite the morning sun. She opened her tablet to a blank canvas, trying to do what she always did. Transform pain into something manageable, something she could contain in neat lines and clever dialogue. But her stylus trembled over the screen. How do you draw the weight of history? How do you capture the way someone says a name like it's both salvation and wound? How do you make trauma into content without cheapening it? A cold draft hit her ankles. She looked up to find her door slightly ajar, Pablo nowhere in sight.
No.
She whispered.
No.
But her cat was already gone, like everything else she thought she could keep safe. Some things, it seemed, couldn't be contained in panels, or hearts, or carefully closed doors. Chapter 21. Missing. Darcy flung open her cabin door, heart pounding. No Pablo. No paw prints in the fresh snow. Nothing.
Pablo.
Her voice cracked as she scanned the white expanse.
Pablo, please.
Darcy?
She spun to find Callum climbing her cabin steps, alone, concern etched on his features. Behind him, near the lodge, she could make out Maya and Rose's figures, their voices carrying across the snow in sharp, angry tones, though the words were indistinct. Everything crashed in at once. Pablo missing. Claire's return. The shadows in Callum's eyes when he remembered Syria. Her chest constricted, each breath shorter than the last.
Hey.
Suddenly his arms were around her, solid and warm.
What's wrong?
Pablo Bador, I can't...
The words tumbled out between gasping breaths.
He's gone, and Claire, and everything's...
Breathe with me.
His hand moved in slow circles on her back.
Just breathe.
Maya and Rose reached the cabin, their argument forgotten at the sight of Darcy's state.
What happened?
Rose demanded.
Cat.
Was all Darcy could manage.
Pablo got out.
Maya translated, her hand joining Callum's on Darcy's back.
And with that moose still hanging around.
Understanding dawned on Callum's face.
Stay here with Maya,
he said firmly.
Rose and I know these grounds better than anyone. We'll find him.
But Claire...
Darcy started.
Claire's got a flight to catch.
Rose cut in, something hard in her voice.
She should already be in her car.
Callum squeezed Darcy's shoulders once before letting go.
We'll bring him back, I promise.
She watched them disappear into the snowy morning, Rose already pulling out her phone to coordinate a search.
Come on.
Maya guided her inside.
Let's get you warm while the mountain rescue team does their thing.
I'm being ridiculous.
Darcy whispered, sinking onto her couch.
Falling apart over a cat when Callum's ex-fiancée CE shows up, and they have all this history and trauma and...
Honey.
Maya grabbed her shoulders.
Focus. First, your cat is missing. That's not ridiculous. Second, did you notice something? Like, say, how Callum came straight here? Alone?
He's just being nice.
No, he literally left Claire mid-conversation when he saw you run out. Rose told me. Apparently Claire's face was priceless.
But they have this connection, this shared pain that I can't.
They have shared trauma.
Maya corrected.
Which, from what Rose just told me, is exactly why they can't work. She keeps pulling him back into their darkest moments instead of moving forward. She can't let go of those ghosts, and she can't let him go on either. Rose thinks that Claire needs Callum to stay in the darkness so she's not alone.
Rose seemed pretty angry.
Darcy admitted.
Yeah, about that.
Maya settled beside her.
Apparently Claire's got a pattern of showing up whenever Callum starts to heal. Whenever he starts to...
She gave Darcy a meaningful look.
To what?
To fall for someone who makes him smile instead of remember.
Darcy's protest died in her throat as she remembered how his face had lit up when he saw her at breakfast, even with Claire right there.
But...
No buts. Right now we're focusing on finding your cat. Then we can discuss how you're both idiots who deserve each other.
A knock at the door made them both jump.
That was fast.
Maya said, standing.
Rose must have.
But when Darcy opened the door, it wasn't Rose's concerned face she found. Claire stood on the threshold, her camera hanging at her side like a weapon. She smiled, and Darcy thought of documentaries she'd seen about predators. How they looked at wounded things with that same mix of sympathy and hunger.
Hello.
Claire said, the word dripping sweet as poison honey.
I think we should talk, don't you?
Chapter 22. Poison. Darcy stood frozen in the doorway, her mind blank of everything except the predatory grace with which Claire occupied the space before her.
Don't you have a plane to catch?
Maya's voice cut through the silence, sharp as ice.
Snowstorm cancellation.
Claire's smile widened, all perfect teeth and practiced charm.
It's lucky I hadn't left the lodge yet.
She moved forward, forcing Darcy to step back as she glided into the cabin.
Such a cozy little space, very artistic.
Her tone made artistic sound like a child's crayon drawing hung on a refrigerator.
You can't just...
Maya started.
Oh, but I can.
Claire settled onto the couch like she owned it, her camera placed deliberately on the coffee table.
Someone needs to explain a few things to our comic artist here. About Callum. About what he needs.
Her eyes fixed on Darcy's tablet.
About reality versus entertainment.
I don't.
Darcy began.
He still wakes up screaming sometimes.
Claire cut in, her voice gentle as a knife.
Did you know that? He dreams about that little boy's hand going limp in his. About the sound the building made as it came down.
She leaned forward.
Tell me, how would you draw that? What clever little speech bubble would capture his grief?
Maya took a step toward Claire, but Claire wasn't finished.
You make pretty pictures of pretty moments. Turn pain into punchlines. But Callum? He lives in the spaces between frames. In the darkness, you can't capture with your pastels and your safe little panels.
She picked up Darcy's tablet, scrolling through the latest comic with elegant disdain.
He needs someone who understands that darkness, who's walked through it with him.
Someone like you?
Maya's voice dripped with sarcasm.
Someone who won't run when the nightmares come. When he can't look at a camera without seeing rubble and blood.
Claire's eyes never left Darcy.
Someone who knows how to handle his trauma instead of turning it into content.
Is that what you're doing?
Darcy found her voice at last.
Handling his trauma, or feeding off it?
Claire's perfect smile flickered.
Excuse me?
Rose told us about your visits. How you show up whenever he starts to heal. Whenever he starts to
Darcy's hands clenched.
move forward.
Rose doesn't understand.
That you need him trapped in that moment with you?
The words burst out before Darcy could stop them.
That you can't bear to face those ghosts alone, so you keep dragging him back into the darkness to keep you company.
For a moment, something raw and wounded flashed across Claire's face. Then her mask slipped back into place.
You think you know him because you shared one kiss in the snow? Because he smiled at your little jokes?
She stood, gathering her camera with deliberate care.
I've seen Rose's posts, the moose incident, the tree cutting, the cozy little breakfast moments.
Her voice took on a mocking sing-song quality.
The way he caught you when you fell. The candlelight at dinner. That staged little moment on the observation deck.
Each moment landed like a slap, reduced to surveillance to evidence.
Wait until the first time he wakes up screaming that boy's name. Until he can't look at you because you represent a future he doesn't think he deserves.
Her fingers tightened on her camera.
The cute little moments Rose captures for Instagram? They're just that. Moments. Frames frozen in time. But I was there for the real story. The ones that didn't make it to social media.
She moved to the door, then paused.
He'll come back to me. He always does. Because I'm the only one who truly understands what we...
Get out.
Maya's voice could have frozen hell. Claire's smile returned, sweet as cyanide.
Of course. I'm sure you have a missing cat to find. Though I wouldn't worry too much. This place has a way of bringing lost things back where they belong.
The threat in her voice was clear as crystal. After she left, Maya locked the door with shaking hands.
Well, she's terrifying.
She's right.
Darcy sank onto the couch.
I don't know how to handle his trauma. I don't know how to...
No.
Maya sat beside her.
She's terrifying because she's wrong. Because she needs Callum broken to feel whole herself.
Outside, they could still hear Callum calling for Pablo, searching for something lost while his past prowled the lodge like a hungry ghost. Darcy touched her tablet, thinking of all the ways she'd turned real pain into art. All the ways she'd hidden from life by drawing it instead. Maybe she and Claire weren't so different after all. But there was a difference, wasn't there? Claire clutched her ghosts close, letting them poison every new moment. Darcy had drawn hers out, panel by panel, letting each stroke of her stylus transform pain into something else. Not just entertainment, understanding. Not exploitation, but evolution. Every failed relationship she'd drawn hadn't been about profiting from pain. They'd been steps forward, each panel a way of processing, of growing, of learning to laugh at the darkness instead of drowning in it. She looked at her tablet with new eyes. All this time she'd thought she was hiding behind her art, when really she'd been healing through it. While Claire used her camera to capture moments and hold them static forever, Darcy's art had always been about movement, about change, about finding light in the shadows. Maybe she and Claire weren't so different after all. They'd both found ways to deal with pain through their chosen mediums. But Claire used hers to stay frozen in time, while Darcy's had always pushed her forward, even when she didn't realize it. Maybe they both needed to learn how to let go of their ghosts. But Darcy, she realized, already knew how. She'd been drawing the map to healing all along. Chapter 23. Storm Warning. Darcy stood, the new clarity burning through her veins. Outside, the calls for Pablo had grown fainter, more distant.
What are you doing?
Maya asked as Darcy wrestled with her clearance rack snow jacket.
Going to find my cat.
The zipper caught halfway up, refusing to budge any further. Perfect.
Whoa, hold up.
Maya grabbed Darcy's arm.
If this is about Claire.
It's not.
Darcy yanked on her two big boots.
Well, not entirely. I need to do something. I can't sit here while Pablo's out there, while Callum's searching, while she's...
She took a breath.
I need to stop watching life happen and start living it. Even if it's messy. Even if it hurts.
That's surprisingly healthy, actually.
Maya narrowed her eyes.
Who are you and what have you done with my friend who thanks people 7 times?
She had an epiphany about processing trauma through art versus getting stuck in it.
Darcy wrapped her scarf twice around her neck.
Also, her cat is missing and she's kind of freaking out about that.
Okay, wait here. Let me grab my gear from my cabin. 2 minutes tops. We can...
I'll start by the lake.
Darcy called over her shoulder, already heading out the door.
Meet me there!
Darcy Wheeler, don't you dare!
But Darcy was already crunching through the snow, following the path they'd taken that first morning. The lake stretched out before her, gray and forbidding under the winter sky. Snow was falling faster now, fat flakes that caught in her eyelashes and obscured the distant shore.
Pablo!
Her voice seemed small against the vastness of white.
Come on, buddy, no moose is worth this.
The wind picked up, driving needles of ice against her cheeks. In the distance, she thought she heard someone calling. Maya? Callum? But the sound was torn away by the rising storm. She pulled her inadequate jacket tighter, remembering too late what Rose had said about mountain weather changing in minutes. The shore had disappeared now, lost in a curtain of white. Even her own tracks were filling in behind her.
Pablo?
This time her voice cracked, more prayer than call. The storm swallowed it whole. Some moments, she realized, weren't meant to be drawn at all. They were meant to be survived, if she could. Chapter 24. Lost and Found. Darcy stumbled through knee-deep snow, the wind howling around her. Her clearance rack jacket had long since given up any pretense of warmth, and her oversized boots were packed with snow that had worked its way down her ankles.
This is what I get.
She muttered through chattering teeth.
For trying to be the hero instead of drawing one.
A dark shape loomed through the whiteout. Hope surged until she got closer. Just another pine tree. The same pine tree, if she wasn't mistaken, that she'd passed 20 minutes ago. Or was it an hour? Time had become as formless as the landscape.
Pablo!
Her voice was hoarse from shouting.
Please!
The wind threw her words back at her, along with a fresh blast of snow. She thought of that first morning, how Callum had appeared like some mountain romance hero to catch her. Now would be a really good time for a repeat performance. But this wasn't a comic panel she could control. No perfectly timed rescue. No convenient. Was that the fallen log she'd seen before? The one that had reminded her of a sleeping dragon. Third time she'd circled back to it if she was right. Which meant she was walking in.
Circles.
She groaned.
I'm walking in stupid circles.
Maya had tried to warn her. Maya, who was probably organizing a search party right now. Maya, who she should have waited for instead of charging off like some half-frozen Don Quixote. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. How long had she been out here? The gray light offered no clues. It could be noon or dusk for all she could tell. Her phone had died an hour ago, its battery no match for the cold. The dragon log looked almost inviting now. She sank onto it, no longer caring about the snow soaking through her jeans. Just a short rest. Just until she could feel her feet again.
I'm sorry, Pablo.
She whispered.
I'm sorry, Callum, I'm sorry.
A sound cut through the wind. Not the howling storm, but something deeper. Rhythmic. Hoofbeats. She looked up, blinking snow from her eyelashes as a massive dark shape materialized from the white. A horse, steam rising from its flanks. And on its back,
You know,
Callum's voice carried through the storm.
when I said we'd save something for tomorrow's adventure, this wasn't what I had in mind.
Relief made her dizzy. Or maybe that was the cold.
My hero.
She managed through numb lips.
Again.
His smile faded as he swung down from the saddle, concern replacing amusement as he took in her state.
Can you stand?
She tried. Her legs had other ideas.
Right.
In one smooth motion, he scooped her up, cradling her against his chest. She felt him speaking to the horse, felt the warmth of him seeping through her frozen clothes, but the words were lost in the growing fog of her mind.
Stay with me,
he murmured, settling her in front of him in the saddle.
That spot I wanted to show you isn't far.
His chest rumbled against her back with a quiet laugh.
Though I'll admit, this wasn't exactly how I planned our first visit. I was thinking more romantic sunset walk and less hypothermic rescue mission. But then again, nothing about us has been conventional, has it? Starting with that moose.
She wanted to laugh, but it came out as more of a sob. Callum's arms tightened around her as he guided the horse through the storm.
Pablo?
She managed.
Safe and warm. Rose found him in the stables, making friends with the horses. Apparently he has expensive taste in hideouts too.
She wanted to laugh, but it came out as more of a sob. Callum's arms tightened around her as he guided the horse through the storm.
I've got you,
he said softly.
I've got you.
And she believed him. Not because it was like one of her panels, not because it was the perfect romantic rescue scene, but because it was real, even if she couldn't feel her toes. Chapter 25. Thaw. Through the curtain of snow, a cabin materialized. Small, solid, its windows dark, but welcoming. Callum dismounted smoothly, keeping one hand on Darcy as he helped her down.
Richard's old hunting cabin,
he explained, fumbling with frozen keys.
Though he did more photographing than hunting.
Inside was cold but dry. Callum moved with practiced efficiency, lighting the wood stove, pulling down blankets, his hands gentle but urgent as he turned to her.
We need to get you out of these wet clothes.
His voice was professional, but a blush colored his cheeks.
Hypothermia isn't exactly the Christmas Eve I had planned.
At least buy me dinner first.
She managed through chattering teeth.
Darcy.
His eyes held hers, serious despite her attempted humor.
You're dangerously cold. We need to...
Share body heat.
Her frozen lips tried for a smile.
Very convenient, Mr. Winters.
That startled a laugh from him.
Even half frozen, you're impossible.
His hands moved to her jacket zipper.
May I?
She nodded, unable to stop shivering as he carefully peeled away her wet layers. His own wet clothes followed, and then he was wrapping them both in blankets, pulling her against his chest on the cabin's small bed.
Not exactly how I imagined our first time in bed together,
she murmured, feeling warmth slowly return to her limbs.
No?
His voice rumbled through her back.
And how did you imagine it?
With fewer cases of hypothermia, more strategic planning.
She pressed closer, seeking his warmth.
Though the bare chest part isn't bad.
Rest,
he whispered, his arms tightening around her.
We can discuss strategic planning later.
She drifted off to the sound of the storm and his heartbeat, steady and strong against her back. When she woke, golden light filtered through the cabin's windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world pristine and new. She was still wrapped in Callum's arms, though the blankets had slipped down to reveal more skin than she was prepared to process before coffee.
Hey.
His voice was soft near her ear.
How are you feeling?
Warm.
She turned in his arms to face him.
Alive. Mortified about the whole getting lost thing.
Don't be.
His fingers traced her cheek.
Though maybe next time wait for backup before charging into a blizzard.
Next time?
Well, I'm hoping there won't be another blizzard rescue, but...
His eyes grew serious.
I'd like there to be a next time, many next times, with you.
She studied his face in the morning light. No shadows lurked there now, no ghosts haunting his eyes. Just Callum, real and warm and looking at her like she was something precious.
I'd like that too.
She touched the scruff on his jaw.
Though maybe we could start with coffee.
Coffee first.
He smiled but didn't move.
Then we can talk about why you really ran out into that storm. About Claire. About everything.
Everything?
Everything.
He leaned closer.
Including all those strategic plans you had for our first time in bed.
Heat that had nothing to do with blankets flooded through her.
Coffee first?
Coffee first.
But neither of them moved toward the small kitchen. Instead, Darcy found herself tracing the lines of his collarbones, feeling his breath catch as her fingers wandered lower.
Or
she whispered.
We could discuss those strategic plans now.
His response was to kiss her, slow and deep and full of promise. Outside, snow glittered in the morning sun, but neither of them noticed. Some moments didn't need to be drawn or photographed. They just needed to be lived, thoroughly. Chapter 26. Shadows. Darcy woke to sunlight painting patterns across bare skin and tangled blankets. She felt Callum press a kiss to her shoulder before reluctantly untangling himself from their warm cocoon.
Stay,
she murmured, reaching for him.
Can't.
Another kiss, this time to her temple.
You need food, and more importantly, coffee.
She watched through half-lidded eyes as he pulled on his jeans and a flannel shirt from the cabin's emergency supplies. Their own clothes lay scattered across the floor, still slightly damp from yesterday's snow.
Here.
He tossed her another flannel and thick wool socks.
These will be warmer than your clearance rack specials.
My hero,
she said dryly, but couldn't help sighing as she slipped into the clothes that smelled like him. The socks, at least, actually fit. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as Darcy watched Callum move around the small kitchen, admiring how his borrowed flannel shirt stretched across his shoulders. Her own clothes were mostly dry, though she'd kept his thick wool socks.
There's always emergency supplies here,
he explained, pulling out coffee and pancake mix.
Richard believed in being prepared for anything.
Anything like rescuing half-frozen comic artists?
That might be a new one.
He set a steaming mug in front of her.
Though speaking of new beginnings...
Smooth transition.
But she smiled into her coffee.
I mean it, Darcy.
He cracked eggs into a bowl, his movements deliberate.
What happened yesterday, with Claire, with the storm? I need you to know something.
That's an ominous start to morning after conversation.
Claire was right about one thing.
He turned to face her.
I do still have nightmares. I probably always will. But she was wrong about what I need.
And what do you need?
Her voice was barely a whisper.
Someone who helps me see the light, not just remember the darkness.
He paused in his cooking to meet her eyes.
Someone who shows me how to transform pain into something beautiful, instead of just carrying it.
I don't transform anything,
Darcy protested softly.
I just draw what I see.
No.
He moved to sit beside her.
You draw what could be. Every panel, every story. You take raw moments and show their possibility, their hope.
His fingers found hers on the table.
I've spent years capturing moments exactly as they are, trying to freeze time. But you show how moments flow into each other, how they change, how they heal.
Is that why you started taking photos again, after we met?
Yeah.
He smiled, thumb tracing patterns on her wrist.
Watching you sketch, seeing how you found joy in real moments, it made me want to try again, to capture life instead of just aftermath.
Even when I'm turning our moments into content?
Especially then.
He lifted her hand to his lips.
Because you don't just record what happens, you show what it means, how it feels.
His eyes crinkled.
Though I'm not sure how you'll draw this particular morning.
Carefully.
She felt her cheeks warm.
Very carefully. And maybe not for public consumption.
His laugh was interrupted by the door bursting open, letting in a blast of cold air, and Claire, her camera still hanging like a weapon at her side.
I knew I'd find you here.
She said, honey-sweet and venomous.
Because I know you, Cal. I know all your haunts, all your hiding places.
Her eyes swept over their state of undress, the rumpled bed.
How quaint. Playing house with your comic artist.
Callum set down the mixing bowl with careful control.
Claire.
Did you tell her about the nightmares yet? About how you sometimes can't look at your camera without seeing that little boy's face? About how you...
Stop.
Callum's voice was gentle but firm.
Just stop.
Why? Because you'd rather pretend those ghosts don't exist? Rather play it normal with someone who turns tragedy into entertainment?
Because the past is over.
He stepped between Claire and Darcy.
Because I've spent years trying to help you move forward, trying to carry your shadow along with mine. But I can't do it anymore.
Can't?
Claire's voice cracked.
Or won't?
Both.
He softened slightly.
We've been drowning in the same memory for so long, Claire. Holding each other under. I had to learn to swim again. To breathe. And you need to learn too.
With her?
Claire spat the word.
With whoever helps you find the light again. But not with me.
He straightened.
I can't be your anchor to that moment anymore.
But I need...
No.
For the first time, steel entered his voice.
You need to face your own ghosts. I can't carry them for you anymore.
Claire staggered back as if struck.
You don't mean that. You can't.
I do. And I think you knew this was coming. Why else track Rose's posts? Why else show up the moment you saw me starting to heal?
Claire's mask cracked completely.
I don't know how to let go.
I know.
Callum's voice gentled again.
But you have to try, for both our sakes.
Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks as she fumbled for the door handle. She paused there, one last time.
Did you ever love me, really?
Yes.
Callum's honesty was kind but absolute.
But we loved our shared pain more, and that's no way to live.
Claire's hand tightened on the door handle until her knuckles went white. She turned one last time, her face a mask of bitter prophecy.
You think you can handle his darkness now, when everything's new and romantic. But wait until you see the ugly truth burned into his soul. You'll run, just like all your comic heroines run. And you're leaving?
Her smile was cruel.
That will be the wound that finally breaks him.
Goodbye, Claire.
Callum's voice was final. She fled into the snow, leaving only silence and the lingering poison of her words. After she left, silence filled the cabin. Darcy stood, moving to Callum's side. His hands were shaking slightly as he picked up the mixing bowl again.
Still want those pancakes?
He asked quietly. She took the bowl from him, set it down, and pulled him into her arms. He buried his face in her neck, breathing deeply.
Thank you,
he whispered.
For what?
For showing me there's more to life than remembering. For teaching me how to draw new endings.
She held him tighter, feeling his shoulders slowly release their tension. Outside, fresh snow glittered with possibility. Some ghosts, it seemed, could finally be laid to rest, even if the pancakes got a little cold in the process. Chapter 27. Drawing Forever. 1 year later.
You're going to be late to your own wedding.
Maya called through the cabin door.
Though I have to admit, that would make an excellent final panel.
Darcy smiled at her tablet screen, her finger hovering over the post button. It had been almost a year since she'd ended Dating Disasters, with what everyone thought was the final strip. Her cartoon self finding love in the snow, a moose playing matchmaker. Her publisher had called it perfect. Her fans had swooned. Even Pablo had seemed impressed. But today deserved one last update. One final panel.
A wedding day special.
She typed.
Because some disasters turn into destinies.
The new strip was simple. That same first encounter by the frozen lake. But now the panel spiraled outward like a snow flurry, showing moments through their year together. Callum teaching her to ride. Pablo claiming the stable as his second kingdom. Their first Christmas together. Then spring, summer, fall, and now. The final panel pulled back to show them under mistletoe, surrounded by Christmas lights and love. Just like they would be in a few minutes. Her notification bar immediately exploded.
Artistic soul. OMG, is this real?
Lovejoy. Crying in my coffee or in hashtag dating disasters forever.
Serpent Heart. Wait, are they getting married today?
Art reflecting life. Or maybe life reflecting art.
Almost done.
She called back.
Just signing off.
Dear readers,
She typed.
some disasters turn out to be beginnings in disguise. Some falls lead to flying. And sometimes the happiest endings aren't endings at all. They're just better chapters waiting to be drawn.
Pablo wound around her ankles, his crystal food bowl long since replaced by one handcrafted from mountain pine. He wore a tiny bow tie for the occasion, though he'd made his feelings about formal wear quite clear during the fitting.
Ready?
Maya poked her head in, resplendent in her maid of honor dress.
Because your mountain man is doing that adorable nervous photography thing again. Pretty sure Rose has enough ceremony setup shots to fill 3 albums.
Darcy stood smoothing her simple white dress. Through the window she could see the lodge decked out for Christmas, wreaths and lights transforming it into something magical. The same observation deck where Callum had first shown her his photos was now an altar, dusted with fresh snow.
He's photographing everything?
She smiled, remembering their first morning in his cabin, when he'd finally started believing in new beginnings.
Everything.
Maya grinned.
Though he keeps coming back to that spot by the lake, where a certain cat tried to fight a certain moose.
Some moments deserve to be captured.
Darcy gathered her bouquet. Pine and winter roses, tied with ribbon the exact green of Callum's eyes. The lodge's great room had been transformed. Fairy lights twinkled everywhere. Mistletoe hung from every doorway, and there, waiting at the end of the aisle, stood Callum. His camera lay forgotten at his side as he watched her approach, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that still made her heart skip. Rose sniffled loudly from the front row, her phone documenting everything. Edward beamed beside his latest, decidedly fireproof sculpture. And there, under the Christmas tree, a moose peered through the window as if checking on the happy ending it had accidentally started.
Hi.
Darcy whispered as she reached Callum.
Hi.
His smile was soft.
Ready for the next chapter?
As long as you promise to keep catching me.
Always.
He touched the tablet she still held.
Though maybe put the comic down for the ceremony?
But the lighting is perfect.
She teased.
Think of the content possibilities.
His laugh was everything she'd ever tried to capture in her panels. Everything she'd learned to live instead of just draw.
I love you,
he said simply.
I love you too.
She handed Maya her tablet.
Even if you did make me wait a whole year to turn you into my final comic panel.
Had to make sure you got my good side,
he teased.
For artistic accuracy, was it worth the wait?
Worth everything.
As they said their vows under the mistletoe, Pablo watched regally from his cushioned seat, clearly taking credit for the whole arrangement. Snow fell softly outside, and somewhere in the distance, a moose called to its mate. Some happy endings, Darcy realized, didn't need to be drawn. They just needed to be lived. Together. Comments loading.
Happily, ever after 88. OMG, the perfect finale. Hashtag crying.
Moose Maven. Can't believe it started with a moose. Hashtag Pine Lake Love.
Artistic soul. Anyone else zoom in on that handmade ring? Those mountains engraved on it? Hashtag love.
Comic Queen. The best stories are the ones that come true. Congrats, Didi girl.
Darcy closed her laptop on the flood of responses, turning to her new husband.
Ready to start for real?
Already started,
he murmured against her lips.
The moment you fell into my life.
And for once, she didn't need to capture the moment. She just lived it. Perfectly.